Brenna, I'm going to see if I can get on live stream with you.
Should be connected.
She's the smart one. He knows that.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, just checking. Thank you.
All right, Brenda, can you test to see if it's working? All right, I have it. Thank you. All right. The court is calling 2019 CR 10230 ex parte RC Curtis. It's a pretrial application for writ of habeas corpus. State, have you had a chance to review the application?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. And state and defense, are both sides ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. we are.
All right. And if both parties can announce for the record, please.
Daryl Harris for the state, Your Honor.
Stephen Spear for the state.
Charles Bunkman, Judge for Mr. Curtis.
All right, and for the record, Mr. Curtis is here. And so the record can be clear. Mr. Morey is by Zoom. Mr. Morey informed the court by phone that he was ill. He said he received permission from the defense to speak to me without their presence. Is that correct, defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
And so Mr. Morey is by Zoom. Is there any objection to Nathan Morey appearing by Zoom? State?
No objection, Judge.
Yes. Defense?
No, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Curtis, do you have any objections to Mr. Morey appearing by Zoom?
No.
And also, the court had received a motion, the application, and the court had denied the application without a hearing, but defense counsel requested a hearing. So the court rescinded the order denying the application. Any objections to the court having rescinded? State?
No objections to the court's rescission, Your Honor. And if I may, just for completeness of the record, for this hearing, Mr. Morey is acting as lead attorney and he has not made a formal announcement.
All right, and Mr. Morey, if you could announce for the record.
Nathan Morey for the state.
All right, thank you. All right, defense, it's your motion.
Your Honor, we would call Elena Altus.
All right. Ms. Altus, if you'll take the stand, please. And everyone, again, I'm not in a robe because it is so hot in this courtroom. And if anybody knows anyone who can fix that, you have my permission to go forth and have them fix that. All right, Ms. Altus, you are an officer of the court, but if you could raise your right hand for me, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give will be the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
All right, you can lower your hand if you'll state your name for the record and please spell it.
Elena Altus, ALAINA ALTIS.
Defense.
Can you hear me okay with the microphone? Okay. Hi, Elena, how are you?
I'm all right.
Good. Can you, I know everybody here in the court knows who you are, but just for record purposes, can you just tell us where you work?
I work at the Bexar County District Attorney's Office as an assistant district attorney for the past 23 years.
And where are you currently?
I'm in the intake division at this point.
And we're gonna jump back to 2016. Do you know where you were assigned during that time?
Yes, in 2016, I was a family violence prosecutor in the DA's office. And I think during the relevant time period for this case, which would have been 2016 up until the September, I was assigned to the 399th District Court as the first chair family violence prosecutor.
And you mentioned the relevant time period. You know, we're here on the RC Curtis case, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so can you tell us what your role is during that relevant time period, beginning in January of 2016 up until September 2016?
So the first time I became aware of the prosecution of RC Curtis for the offense of capital murder was through an email sent by Tamara Strouch on April the 6th of 2016.
Okay. And did you start working on the RC Curtis case?
No, that email actually was asking the chief of the division, Jim Wheat, whether or not who would be assigned to that murder case, that the arrest warrant had gone out and the defendant was in the Bexar County Jail. And she was inquiring whether this was going to be assigned to the criminal trial division or to the family violence division. And Jim responded by email that it should be with the family violence division, and Elena Altus is the first chair in that court would be have the lead responsibility on the case. But that wasn't actually what happened. We got an email back from Tamara at 5:05 that same day that said that she had spoken to the chief of the trial division, Michael Hoyle, and Michael Hoyle said that Mata Lisa Jansen, an assistant district attorney in the criminal trial division, was lead attorney on the case because she had been, I guess, conferring and advising the San Antonio Police Department during their investigation prior to the warrant being walked on Mr. Curtis.
All right, in defense, if you can make sure you speak in the microphone so that I can hear and everyone can hear, please.
All right, and at some point in time, you did assist Mata Lisa Jansen with drafting an indictment in this case, correct?
So per Michael Hoyle's decision, that Madi was lead prosecutor, and I know from an email that I was asked to go out to the medical examiner's office on the RC Curtis case with Madi to talk to the ME about the autopsy of the victim. And so I did actually go out to the ME's office. I had a calendar setting date and time there that I was notified that we had an appointment with the medical examiner. And I prepared by reading the prosecution guide and reading the autopsy. That was the only involvement I had with the case prior to that meeting. So went out to the ME's office with Madi, met with the medical examiner, and when I returned, the only thing I did on the case was I talked to Madi about the indictment that she drafted up.
And you just, part of your nature as a prosecutor, you're very detailed on your work. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
And you mentioned a calendar, and you had previously showed me some of your calendar. You kind of know almost everything you do. Big changes, I guess, on a calendar, correct?
Right. I have a personal calendar where I record when I moved in and out of a division. And so I know the exact date that I moved out of that division because I noted in my personal calendar.
And what date was that?
I was transferred. I was still a family violence first chair, but I was moved to the 437th District Court, and the prosecutor that took over the RC Curtis case in the 399th was Scott Simpson, and that was on September the 12th of 2016.
Okay, so September to the 12th, 2016 is when you had nothing else to do with Mr. Curtis's case.
Correct.
Okay, and in preparation for this hearing, you went through and looked through emails regarding this case. Is that correct?
Right. I did it as soon as I found out that there was a writ in the case. I was asked about an email that I had received by Daryl Harris. I was asked by Daryl Harris about an email I had received from Mata Lisa Jansen regarding the RC Curtis case. And in response to that question, I went and did a search on my own Outlook account my office Outlook account for RC Curtis correspondence within the office. And I found a number of things that I was able to put a timeline together regarding the movement of the case in the office in 2016.
May I approach?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as defense exhibit number 1. Do you recognize this document?
I wouldn't call it a document, but States Exhibit 1, the first page is the first draft of the timeline I put together. And then the subsequent pages are the photocopies of the emails that I was able to research that I just testified about.
And you say first draft because you did add a couple other emails to your draft.
Right.
Timeline.
Once the first draft was about, the timeline was about the email content. And then I updated it to add a couple of other items that I was able to gather from other documents.
Can I take a glance?
Yep, sure. If you want to use it, you can.
Okay. And just as far as the update on the timeline, it was, you noted on August the 22nd, 2016 is when Antonio Pena was interviewed, correct?
Right.
And September 12th, what we talked about, you were transferred to the 437th and Scott Simpson took lead in the 399.
Right. So what happened was I was able to look at a couple of envelopes and discs to integrate that into the to the timeline. But I also updated when I left the 399th as lead prosecutor. And then I had another notation that I don't think
It
made it
was,
to the timeline. So that wasn't the only change.
Okay.
It was just updated with some supplemental documents.
So would you agree that Defense Exhibit 1 goes through all of the emails that you had looked for and received?
I would not agree that Defense Exhibit number 1 is an incomplete draft of what you should, of what was updated and emailed to both defense counsel and the state.
Okay, well, I'm going to show you Defendant's Exhibit number 2. Do you recognize that document?
Yeah.
And is that an email that you received or that that you found subsequent to giving us the timeline of events?
Yes, so this was provided to me by another member of the DA's office. And it is an email that I had received. Yes, so I recognize the content of Defendant's Exhibit 2.
Okay, and tell me again what you're saying is missing, because Defense Exhibit 1 is all of the emails that we had received from you.
Defense Exhibit 1 is the first draft of the timeline I put together in preparation for the questions on the WRIT.
Okay.
And if you have a copy, and you're welcome to take this copy, which I'm referring to refresh my memory as for the testimony today.
Okay. I'll let you have that. At this time, I would move Defense Exhibit 1 and 2 into evidence.
State. You're muted.
I cannot see it or review it from where I'm at.
All right, so
Is
let's
it
do
possible?
this. If possible, if you all would email it to Mr. Moray, is that possible?
Yeah, I've got my email open.
Yes, we have it on an email. It's an email that was sent to us from Daryl.
All right, Mr. Harris, if you can email that to Mr. Moray, please.
This is the-
And I guess I really only have one concern is I understand there's some emails. I'm less concerned about the emails.
Let's
But
get the email to you, then we can hear if there are any objections.
okay.
I sent the updated timeline from November 14. So. Just about, can you tell me what the date of the first one is exactly?
It was on description.
And his email after 12 forwarding. Just went. Your Honor, the email just went to Mr. Maury. Ms. Jones, so number 2 is the updated timeline?
No, number 2 was just that Grace Carter email.
Okay.
The updated timeline just has like a couple of things.
That was when I-
You don't have the,
No, he doesn't have the Grace Carter.
I don't have the email. Text.
I'll email it to Nathan.
You got it? Okay.
I received it.
And then Nathan, I'm forwarding you exhibit 2.
Your Honor, I don't have any objection to the emails, but the outline, I think that's hearsay, doesn't fall under an exception. I have no problem with her being questioned about the contents of the outline or using it to refresh her memory, but it's not admissible.
Just one moment, please. All right, could I see defense exhibits, please? Okay. All right, thank you. All right, so with regards to defense, oh, you can have a seat. Okay, sure. All right, with regards to defense exhibit number 2, is there any objection, state?
Which one is number 2?
Number 2 is at the top, it says Grace Carter.
Oh,
And
no
it
objection to
is
that
a-
one.
All right, then defense exhibit number 2 is admitted without objection. All right, and with regards to state's exhibit number 1, which appears to be a timeline on the R.C. Curtis murder case from the LaHood administration, that's how it's labeled at the top. You have an objection?
Just to the timeline. But the remaining emails I'm fine with. The
So you have an
timelines hearsay,
objection to the timeline, but no objection to the emails?
yes.
All right. So what is your objection with regards to the timeline?
It's hearsay. It doesn't fit under an exception. It's a document that she crafted a statement for this hearing, and it certainly can be, she can be questioned about it, but the document itself is hearsay.
All right, Ms. Altus, the R.C. Curtis murder case timeline from LaHood administration, page 1 of defense exhibit number 1, is that a timeline that you created?
It is. It's just not the final version of the timeline. I have the final version of the timeline right here to refresh my memory during my testimony today. And there are fundamental differences between the two documents.
All right, defense state is objecting to hearsay.
Your Honor, it was created, that's how we received the entire document from Mr. Harris. It was all in one PDF with that timeline on the front and then all of the emails attached in that one document. So that's why it was included just for, because that's how we received it. If we want to take it off, that's fine. All of the dates and the explanation is created by the witness.
So defense, you have no objection to removing page 1 of defendant's exhibit number 1?
It's fine. It's literally just spells out what's contained in the emails that
All
are
right.
contained in there.
But so the record can be clear. Defense, you have no objection to removing page 1?
No.
All right, so then page 1 of defendant's exhibit number 1 will be removed. And if you would like to label the remaining page as defense number 3 or defense 1A, however you want to label it.
Okay.
Because my understanding, there are no objections to the other portion of the exhibit.
Just remove
We'll put another sticker.
Yeah.
We'll do that.
Just do 1A.
All right, so then the defense, you're offering state's exhibit 1A, which
Yes.
does not contain Ms. Altus' rendition of a timeline, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objection, state?
No, Your Honor.
All right, then defense exhibit 1A is admitted. And defense exhibit number 1 was rescinded by defense.
And Your Honor, do you have number 2?
Yes. You're welcome.
All right, Elena. On July 25th, 2016, you recall getting an email from Madalisa Jansen.
Yes.
And in that email, that's been admitted as portion of defense exhibit 1A, she indicates that she's left a file on your desk and the case, she's no longer on the case. Do you recall that email?
I recall that email and I disagree with what you say it says because it's a little different than that, but it says that she left the file for R.C. Curtis and co-defendants on my chair. And that per Michael Hoyle, I was going to be responsible for the case and she would no longer be working on it.
Okay, so she indicated that she was no longer going to be working on the case.
As of that date, yes.
Okay. And that's contained in her email to you.
Yes, so 7/25/2016 at 2:14, she sends me an email saying that she's left the files on my chair and that she would not be handling the case going forward.
Okay, and then shortly after that, you forward the email to Jim Wheat, who was Family Violence Trial Division or Chief.
He was the chief of my division. It was called Special Crimes Division. And so I did forward that, asking him for what his knowledge was about this transfer of the file from her responsibility to my
Do
responsibility.
you recall if you ever, you don't have to tell us what was said, but do you recall if you ever did have a phone conversation with Mr. Wheat about that?
I don't know that I ever got any response back from Mr. Weed. I do know that Marty and I talked about it because there's another email where we're playing phone tag.
And so you eventually, I was gonna get to that one next. So on July 26th, you emailed Marty asking to talk, and there's kind of an email about, sorry, we were playing phone tag type of communication, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then do you recall, based on your memory of talking with Marty, who at that point in time on July 26th, moving forward till September, when you were moved out of that courtroom, who was working on, who was responsible for R.C. Curtis?
My recollection is that it was still a little bit up in the air. There was discussion between myself, my chief, her, I, and her chief. And so it was a very, and I don't recall specifically how it ended up. I just know that the file that she left in my chair became the responsibility of the 399th first chair in the Family Violence Division.
And that would be where you were assigned at that point in time.
As of that day, that was my assignment, but I did not substantively handle the case during my time because I was moved from the 399th and replaced by prosecutor Scott Simpson before the first trial date. So I never read the file. I never prepared on the case. I never did anything on the case. It just happened to be assigned to the Family Violence Division during that month and a half that I was still first chair, but the case I never even read the file.
And did you go and pull some of your notes that you did have pertaining to this case?
Right. I know I never read the file because it is my practice in every single murder case I've ever handled over the past 23 years to take a notepad, write a witness list based on the names I come across as I'm reading through the file. I read the file in a particular order and I write down either verbatim what the offense report and the detective report and the witnesses statements and the crime scene report says. And in this case, regarding R.C. Curtis's capital murder, I have a witness list. I have a one-page summary of the prosecution guide, and then I have a 3.5-3-page notes on the autopsy, which tells me that I never read the file as the prosecutor handling the case.
Okay. And we've discussed this with you previously. You were open to talk to us last week in your office, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in your notes, we asked you, do you have anything mentioning DVDs of interviews, correct?
I don't remember if that was a specific question I was asked. I read y'all some of the notes I made, which is my thoughts as I'm reading through the prosecution guide. I did make some notes, and I do think some of those notes referred to videos and questions about statements.
But nothing pertaining specifically to an Antonio Pena or an Antonio Jones.
Oh, right. We noted that Antonio Pena and Antonio Jones were not one of the names I had listed, having read the prosecution guide.
Okay. And turning now to defense exhibit number 2, is an email. Do you recall? You a couple days ago that it was found, but an individual named Grace Carter emailed you on August 11th, 2016, indicating that a DVD was brought into the office today. Attention to you, Elena, regarding defendant Curtis RC with his SID number, what the charges. And she says it's ready to be picked up. I'm located on the 4th floor, Pet Building, room 412. Thank you. Do you recall getting that email?
Yes, this email was handed to me this week by someone in the trial division.
Okay.
I mean, so somebody in the DA's office, sorry.
Back in 2016, do you recall getting this email?
No, I have no recollection of getting it. And in fact, when I did my email search, I did not find this as part of the RC Curtis, but when I was handed this copy, I did go back and look in my own Outlook, and it was there. So I definitely received it, and according to the tracking on Outlook, I read it. So I opened the email and read it back in 2016, that same day that it was sent.
And who gave you this email this week?
Rachel Velasquez.
And do you know who Grace Carter is?
Yes, she still works in the DA's office. She's a paralegal currently, and she used to be a support staff member in the intake division back in 2016.
Do you know how Rachel Velasquez came across this email?
I don't know. I just know that she gave it to me.
And can you tell us for the record, generally when evidence like DVD interviews come in from the police department or the Bear County Sheriff's Office or any law enforcement come to the DA's office, how is that logged with y'all?
So back in, I could tell you about 2016, in August of 2016, how it happened is that the detective would, or the employee from the agency would come to the DA's office, 4th floor. There was a room where Grace Carter was officing with another employee whose responsibility it was to receive prosecution guides as well as supplemental paperwork and supplemental DVDs, videos on criminal cases that were over here with the DA's office. The logbook from 2016 only reflected the prosecution guides that were dropped off by detectives, and that the videos that were dropped off by themselves without being paired with a prosecution guide were not logged in any manner back in August of 2016.
Okay, and this logbook, is it like a handwritten logbook?
It sure is.
So just so I'm clear, the DVDs that we're discussing, you went and personally looked or questioned somebody to look for the through the logbook to see whether they were logged into the DA's office.
As soon as I was notified about this file stamp on the August 11th, 2000, the received stamp on that envelope that contains someone's interview, I did take it upon myself to get the DA's office to research whether that was received on the 4th floor back in 2016 as it was stamped, and to pull that logbook up. That logbook was located by a member of the DA's office this last week. And Detective Heinz did record in the logbook dropping off a prosecution guide for another criminal case involving another defendant on August 11th of 2016. Then we inquired further, was there a second logbook for supplemental evidence such as DVDs that are dropped off in envelopes? And the answer I received this week or last week was, both this week and last week, was that the videos themselves were not logged in by the detective, and they weren't logged in by the DA's office either. So the only record of that being received is the stamp on the envelope and the email that Grace Carter sent me on August 11th of 2016.
Okay. And when you received a file from Maudie, when she did you in fact receive a physical file from Maudie Jansen?
Yes, my recollection of the physical file that she left in my chair back in July of 2016 was that she gave me the grand jury folder.
Was it anything in a box?
I don't remember there being a box. I remember there being a grand jury folder.
Do you remember when you passed this off to Scott Simpson? Did you physically hand him a file?
No, so the way things were kept back then in the Family Violence Division in the 399th is all the physical files, all the grand jury folders would be kept in a filing cabinet in the advocate's office. And so R.C. Curtis's case was one amongst the files that were kept in that manner. And so I never passed off, I never physically handed off the file to Scott Simpson. It's simply, I moved offices from one, I moved cases. I don't think I even physically moved offices at the time. I think he just took over responsibility in working with the staff for that court. And I took over working with the staff in the 437th.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit 3 and 4. Do you recognize these envelopes?
I don't recognize them from my time handling the R.C. Curtis case. I do recognize him from something Daryl Harris showed me last week or the week before last. I can't remember. And this doesn't look like it looked when I looked at it. So defense exhibit number 4 contains a DVD I haven't seen before. It only contained
I'm just asking about the front
okay.
picture of it.
We showed you two exhibits you have.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
So just on the front though, and have you worked with a Detective Heinz in your 23 years before?
Oh, yes.
Do you recognize the handwriting that's on the outside of these envelopes?
No.
You do not recognize the handwritings? You don't recognize that to be Detective Heinz's handwriting?
No, I don't know what Detective Heinz's handwriting looks like. It would be speculation. It's a good guess, but it would be speculation.
Thank you. Pass the witness.
State.
Miss Altus. When you said you testified on direct that you went through the file and made a witness list.
No, I read the prosecution. I had to have read the prosecution guide, the original prosecution guide, because I had I have a list of the witnesses and I have a short summary of what the facts are of the case. And I read the autopsy.
So in a typical prosecution guide, where are you getting the names for the witnesses you listed?
So the prosecution guide is another name for the detective's report, and Detective Heinz's report would indicate in it the names of the lay witnesses and the names of the officers and the names of the detectives that did any type of investigation on the case.
And you're referring to the portion that's in the first section of the prosecution guide that sort of lists each individual person in a brief statement as to how they're related to the case.
No, I'm talking about the whole thing. So it can be that short list that he puts on the front 2 pages of his, or it could be in the body where he's going through day by day, talking about what's going on. There might be a name contained in one of those paragraphs that wasn't in the list on the first page, but I would write them on my notepad because I read that they did something. So I'd go ahead and add them to this list and indicate out to the side what their involvement was.
So for instance, if Antonio Jones was mentioned later in the prosecution guide, but not in the first section, is it possible you may have skipped over his name in doing your witness list?
Yeah, I mean, it would be, it looks like I put down lay witnesses. I put down somebody by the name of Scott Christopher Perez, and Kyman Reed. So I'm pretty sure those people were listed later in a paragraph, but I can't say for certain Antonio Pena wasn't mentioned somewhere later, and I just neglected to write his name down.
Or Antonio Jones?
Yeah, or that guy.
So you never went through and watched any of the DVD interviews in this case, is that correct?
No, I never read the police reports other than the prosecution guide, and I never viewed any DVDs or looked at any videos or photographs or anything.
Okay. At any point, did you ever do a workup of this case to prepare for a trial or any kind of contested court hearing?
No, in fact, today I was able to look at the computer system and note that there was no trial setting for the case while I was handling it. So there was a setting that didn't take place in August. And I would have read the murder case prior to going to a first setting on it. So I never read the case. I never prepared for any settings on it. I did not do any substantive work on the case.
So in terms, if you had received any DVDs in this case from Detective Heinz, or if there were any other DVDs in the folder or box or whatever it was, is it fair to say that you did not know the specific contents of the statements in those DVDs?
Right. If I had received a DVD, I would have put it in the file for safekeeping. Because that's what I did with everything. I would take the evidence and put it in the file and make sure it's there for when we're ready to work the case up.
At any point, did you form an intent to withhold a DVD from the defense in this case?
No, I would never do that. I turn everything over. I make sure defense attorneys look at my physical file and tell me that they've got everything contained in the physical file. Had I ever gone to a trial setting on this, I would have asked the defense attorney to take a look at the state's file and tell me what things he was missing, and I would provide him a copy of that. I kept every bit of evidence in the state's file. I didn't keep it separate in some other part of the office or my office or anyone else's office. The state's file would stay together as the state's file with all of the evidence that we'd received from law enforcement or any other source in it.
And now you've worked under at least 3 administrations.
Yes, I'm in my 23rd year right now.
Has it been the habit and practice of all 3 administrations to allow defense access to the physical file?
Yes, and in fact, we had open file policy where when I started in 99, the defense attorneys were asked to come to the DA's office and look at the file upstairs.
I'll pass the witness.
Do you have any knowledge that these DVDs were ever in the file?
I don't know where those DVDs were. I know that I did not ever hide those DVDs. I did not do anything
That's
with
not my
them.
question. I'm just asking whether you know whether
I don't
those
know anything
DVDs
about those DVDs. The first time I saw them, was when Daryl showed them to me. a
But
few
you do
weeks ago.
agree that you received an email on August 11th, 2016, indicating I've got this DVD for you, one DVD. It's got your name on it and it's attention to this case that you claim, you acknowledge was your case at the time. So you agree that you have a DVD directing you to come and pick this up, and you agree that it was your case at the time, correct?
And if I picked up the DVD, I would have put it in the file for safekeeping.
Okay, and but you have, when evidence is supposed to get logged, when you go and pick up evidence, do you sign off that you're picking it up from that?
So
log?
that was my question was about if Grace kept a log about who picked that specific DVD. And we have to be clear that it was only one DVD that has a receive stamp on it. The other envelope doesn't have any type of indication that it was received. Both of those were found in the state's file. So I have to infer that they were placed in the DA's file as soon as they were received. So,
You have no knowledge of that.
but they were found there, so they had to be placed there.
This case was pending for 6 years, correct?
Right. And I did not have it since September of 2016.
Well, I'm just wanting to go back to the word that you would have to infer that it was in the state's file. You said you never saw these DVDs in the file that you had, correct?
I don't know. It's been, what, 5-6 years since I've seen the file. I'd never reviewed the file. I don't know what was there when Marty brought it to me. I don't know what was there when I passed it on, when it was taken over by Scott Simpson. And I don't know what it looked like when it went from Scott Simpson to Daryl Harris, and from Daryl Harris to anyone else who worked on the file. I know that in the DA's office, people take files, they put paper in, take paper out, move it around, put it in a box, reorganize it. But I know that the DA's office as a whole does a very good job of keeping physical paper and discs together to make sure that there is a continuity on the case from one prosecutor to the next, because we do pass cases off to each other all the time.
I want to go back to something you just said previously on your testimony. You had mentioned that if you had seen these DVDs, you would have made note of it, correct?
Have I testified to that?
On
No,
direct examination, I asked you about your notes and about whether or not you had these names written in your notes, and you indicated that if you had seen them, you would have written them down.
no, that's not what I answered earlier. What I was answering earlier was whether or not I had seen the name, that name Antonio Pena or Antonio Jones when I was reading the prosecution guide, and that you and I and Charles had discussed in my office last week that I did not have those two individuals listed as a witness when I reviewed the prosecution guide before going to the ME's office.
And so you just testified now that you didn't look through the file when the file was given to you by Marty. Am I understanding that correctly?
I don't know whether I did or not. I know I never reviewed the case as the first chair handling it.
So you don't know if these DVDs were in that file at that point in time. Is that what you're saying?
Well, they weren't in the file when they were brought in, because one of them, when they were brought to me by Marty, because Detective Heinz did not drop off Antonio Jones' interview until August 11th, and I don't believe he interviewed him, I guess, 5 days after July 24th. So the date on that DVD for Antonio Jones' interview is 5 days after the case was passed off to me. And then, or passed off, or since Marty's email to me. And then the second one, the date on that was even after August 11th of 2016. So they could not have been in the state's file at the time.
They could not have been in the state's file when you received the file from Marty, correct?
Right, what she dropped in my chair.
But they could have been, what my question is at some point when the file was yours, before you passed the case off to Scott Simpson, they could have been in the file. Is that
If
correct?
I had picked either of those up, I would have put them in the file. That's my testimony.
But you, and your testimony is that you have no recollection of picking up the DVDs.
Only one DVD was received by the DA's office by Grace on August 11th, and I don't remember if I picked it up or not, but if I did pick it up, I would have put it in the state's file.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right. State,
Just a few follow-ups. Ms. Altus, is picking up a DVD, is that a fairly mundane task?
Yeah, I mean, we have to go get evidence from wherever it got dropped off in our office. And so, well, I would have done it, or one of the people working with me, or I could have had it brought upstairs to Rachel to put in the file. There's a number of different things that could have taken place after I received that email.
That was my next question. And I understand you may not remember this exact instance, but is it possible that you maybe asked someone in your work group to pick it up for you?
Or have it delivered to one
Or
of the
have-
people in my work group. Mhm.
Okay, no further questions.
Just one more briefly. Do you recall having any conversations with Detective Heinz regarding this case?
No,
Nothing further, Your Honor.
all right, any follow-up, State?
No, Your Honor.
All right, is this witness excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Well, Ms. Altus, you may go about your business, or either you can remain.
Thank you, Judge.
All right, you too. All right, defense, call your next witness.
Detective Heinz.
Good afternoon, Detective.
Hi, how you doing, man?
Oh, great. It's a beautiful day outside. You
Oh,
can raise your right hand.
Yes,
You
ma'am.
solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give will be the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
All right, you can lower your hand, and if you could state your name for the record, please.
Detective Randall Heinz.
All right, defense.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, thanks. I'm just gonna, how long have you been a detective for?
20 years.
Always with SAPD?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so I'm just gonna kind of dive right in. You are the lead detective on the RC Curtis case.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you work with another detective on this case?
Detective Richard Richardson, and I think he was a detective at the time. He's a sergeant now, role cardenas. Those are the only two I remember.
Tim Angel ever work on it?
Oh, yes, he did. Mhm.
All right. And this case, would you agree with me, has, for lack of a better expression, a lot of moving parts. Would you agree with that?
I don't know what you mean.
What I mean is that there wasn't just a murder, there was also investigations into credit card abuse as well.
Yes, that's correct.
And there was a lot of names mentioned and thrown out throughout the course of the investigation, correct?
Yes,
Various people using credit cards, is that correct?
yes,
And were you the lead detective on those cases, the credit card cases as well?
yes.
All right. You, this murder happened in October of 2015, is that, do you recall that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you recall when you turned over your prosecution guide to the district attorney's office?
Not the exact date. It was sometime after March of 2016.
And prior to the indictment of that year? Do you know?
I don't know what you mean prior to the indictment. I turned the case into the DA's office sometime after March of
And then
2016.
subsequent to that, he was indicted.
I assume so. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you recall on sometime in the summer of 2018, so after you've turned over your prosecution guide, you interviewed two individuals, one by the name of Antonio Jones and one by the name of Antonio Pena. Do you recall that?
Yes, ma'am. But it was 2016, I believe.
Did I not say?
You said 2018.
Okay, sorry. Summer of 2016.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for correcting me on that.
Mhm.
And when you're working on a case, do you know what RMS is?
Yes.
And I think that has a new name now, is that correct?
The one we're using now is called Mark 43. Mark 43, MARK
And just so the
43.
record's clear, because I just recently learned about this, and so if
Mhm.
I say anything wrong, please correct me. This is just kind of a running list of notes, and a lot of these notes eventually get transferred over to your prosecution guide that you turn over. Is that fair to say?
No, not necessarily. Each detective uses RMS in their own way. It's not something that it's mandatory that we do one thing one way or the other. Some of us just keep running notes, and some of us just drag and drop our prosecution guides into it when we're finished with it.
Okay. How do you personally use RMS?
I typically I would just drag and drop the case into the RMS system. And sometimes I forget to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you interviewed an individual, would that make it into RMS or no?
Not necessarily. I'll either do a follow-up report, or if it's just like a statement, I'll just let the prosecutors know I'm bringing a statement over that I took on a particular case.
Okay. In preparation for this hearing, did the state ask you to hand over your RMS notes on this case?
Yes,
Did you do that?
yes.
May I approach your honor?
Yes.
I'm going to hand you what has been previously marked as defense exhibit number 5. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, ma'am.
Let you take a look through all the pages to make sure.
Ms. Jones, what is number 5?
The RMS that you sent us.
Yeah.
You want to see it there?
I just need to know which one of the files.
All right, and could everyone please make sure that Mr. Murray has that sent to him by email?
Yes, ma'am, that's what I'm looking.
Thank you.
Okay, got it. I know which one.
Already have it.
Whatever his name is.
And defense exhibit number 5, you said that you recognize it. What do you recognize it to be?
It's notes from my prosecution guide that was loaded into RMS.
And does this look like a full and accurate copy or reflection of your notes in RMS.
Yes, ma'am.
For the purposes of this hearing, Your Honor, I would move this into evidence.
All right, Mr. Murray, have you received defense exhibit number 5 yet?
Just send an email right now, Judge.
Not yet, but I'm looking.
Detective Heinz, do you have a copy of this with you?
No, ma'am.
Does a copy need to be made for him?
Might be easiest for questions. My runner will go do it
Yes.
right now.
May I
Yes,
cross?
yes.
I'm more of a walker at my age.
So
And Mr. Murray, whenever you've had a chance to review that, just let the court know.
what I received is a 34-page Word document with I guess the officer's notes. I don't have a problem with them coming in for a purpose that's not hearsay.
In Your Honor, we're not offering them for the truth of the matter asserted. We're just offering them because these are the notes that he made and how he conducted his investigation and how he proceeded in this investigation.
All right, and I'm sorry, Ms. Jones, you can remain seated because it's easier for the microphones to pick up.
Okay.
So I don't think Mr. Murray heard your,
Did you hear me, Nathan?
As long as they're not coming in for their truth, then I have no objection.
all right.
And they are.
So for the record, defense exhibit number 5, defense has stated that they are not offering those records for the truth of the matter asserted. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. With that being said, state any objections to defense number 5.
No.
All right, then defense number 5 is admitted, and we are just waiting for Mr. Bonk to make copies for the witness.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, and it's been admitted, Mr. Bonk, so if you could just leave a copy with Mr. Heinz, and does that need to be stapled?
They're not, it's not stated.
All right, you all probably should staple that.
This, we'll see if that detective that will do it.
Probably not. It's too many pages.
Paper clip or a binder clip.
Here, Mr.
All right.
Detective Heinz.
All Oh, we got one. Thank you, Judge.
Do you need one, Mr. Bonk?
Please approach.
Yes. You're welcome. The state, do you need a binder? A binder?
No,
for-
ma'am.
All right,
No, ma'am.
Okay, proceed.
yes.
All right, Detective Heinz, I just want to, at the end of this document,
Mhm.
one of the last things that you noted in here was from Friday, January 29th, 2016. Do you agree with that?
Yes, ma'am.
And
In defense, just one moment. Mr. Murray is no longer on screen. Ah, he's back. Okay. So would you like to repeat that last question?
yes. Would you agree with me that at the end of this document, one of the last things that's noted that you did in this document occurred on January 29th, 2016?
Yes,
So would you agree with me that's not the last date that you worked on this case?
I agree. Yes, ma'am.
And your prosecution guide that you turned over to the state, you said that you believed you did that in March of 2016?
Yeah, when I filed the case, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so shortly after that January 29th date that you have noted, you filed the case over with the DA's office, correct?
March of 2016, yes, ma'am.
But you continued working on the case, didn't you?
Yes,
And part of the work that you did later on was over the summer of 2016, we already talked about it. You interviewed Antonio Pena and Antonio Jones. Would you agree?
yes.
Your Honor, may I push the witness? I'm gonna show you what's been marked as defense exhibit 3 and 4. Do you recognize those envelopes?
Yeah.
And how do you recognize them?
These are DVD interviews that I brought to the DA's office.
And would that be your handwriting on the front?
Yes, ma'am.
And you recognize that as your handwriting?
Yes, ma'am.
And you have, how do you know that it's about the RC Curtis case? What does
I
it say
mean,
that it's?
yeah, on the envelope.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not a trick question.
Okay, I'm like, okay, yes, ma'am. Yeah, because his name is on the envelopes.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time, I would move to admit, I'm only interested in admitting the envelopes. This came from the DA's office, and it has the DVDs inside. I don't mind admitting the DVDs, the actual interviews as well. But the envelopes was what I'm mostly interested in. I
All
don't
right.
know if the state wants to.
State, with regards to the before that's taken, just a second. With regards to the DVDs that are in the envelopes, the defense is not offering those. Do you understand that?
Your Honor, I'm
Yes.
gonna- I can change. I'll offer the DVDs as well.
Well, I mean, this is what we can do. If you all want to offer the DVDs as well, you can, or either you can make a copy of the envelope and return the envelope with the DVDs in them to the state.
This is the Pena and the Jones interviews and their envelopes.
Yes.
Yes. And
Were
she-
those
offer
were
the-
already admitted in the prior hearing? Is that correct?
I believe that they were.
Can we just
No.
carry those exhibits over and then make copies of the envelope? I would, that
No,
would be my
those were,
preference.
my understanding is those were not admitted.
No, if they admitted the DVDs, they're in my vault, but these envelopes were not, or I would have had them already.
So does anyone object to just having the defense make a copy of the envelope on the copy machine? Because nobody wants to admit the contents, and then they can label those.
We will move to admit the contents as well. I thought that
Oh, I-
the DVDs were already part of the record.
Yeah, that was my thing. If they're already part of the record, I just assume only have one big exhibit. But if you want to admit a second copy, I don't have any objection to the DVDs themselves. I would have, so long as they're not, I just want to, I don't want them coming in for their truth. I'm not vouching for the truth of whatever was said by the witnesses in the statements, but I have no problem with them coming in to show what information the police had and what information came to our office.
All
And
right,
I have
so
no
the
problem
record-
copying the envelope and admitting that copy as
All right,
well. I
and
would
so
like
the
to keep the
record is-
original.
So the record is clear. What Brennan does not have in evidence that was never admitted is the actual envelope that you have.
Okay.
Can I clarify real quick?
Yes.
Okay, I would have to go back and look, but the DVDs of those interviews were played into the record. Now, they probably are admitted in my vault, but just not those copies.
Okay. That's what I don't know. I wasn't here. I've read the record and they were played for the court back at a
Yes.
previous hearing. So I assumed that they were admitted at that point in time.
Dana, if you just photocopy the envelopes, we can make sure between the two of us and the court reporter, we can make sure that the record has the DVD.
Okay.
All right, thanks. I appreciate everyone for
Yeah,
following my
okay.
suggestion
They
10
are-
minutes later.
I do have the DVD.
We're lawyers. We have to discuss
To
it first.
copy the envelope.
Okay.
You want,
The
they
DVD.
were, they were, dates 176.
Okay. So the record's clear. At the previous hearing, in this case, States Exhibit 176 and 177 were admitted the DVDs. So we will copy later on and admit these envelopes as,
Let's just go make a copy of the envelopes right now so we can.
See if I can be fast.
No, back off. You've messed up this thing enough. I got it.
make color copies.
What?
I believe,
We don't.
I believe I've got color copies of both envelopes that I would happily
So that,
share and help me.
okay, just make copies then.
Your Honor, while he's away, I'm going to take a very, very, very short break. Do you mind?
No, you
Thank
may
you.
take your break. Why don't we all take a short break and whatever copies that we need, if y'all can make copies of those. So everyone, we're gonna take a 5-minute break.
Right. But
Left side, sorry.
All right, so we are back on the record and defense. I believe you had exhibits.
Yes, exhibit number 3 and 4. And then also, I think we've agreed that the actual interviews themselves are being admitted as well.
All right, any objections from the state?
No, Your Honor.
Defense exhibits 3 and 4 are admitted into evidence.
Okay. I'm just gonna ask a couple of questions about the exhibit while I'm sitting up here. So on the handwriting on 3 and 4, you testified that you recognize that to be your handwriting, correct?
Yes.
And after you took down these statements, what did you do with these 2 exhibits, these 2 envelopes? When you took after the statements that the interviews that you did with Mr. Pena and Mr. Jones, what did you
Yes.
do with them?
I walked them over here to the DA's office.
Okay.
There you go.
Do you recall the date that you walked these over to the DA's office?
No, ma'am, I don't.
On defense exhibit 3, well, sorry, Your Honor, I'm going to go back up and show them.
No problem. And everyone, please, because we don't have a jury in the box, please feel free to move towards the witness and leave the witness as needed.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right, on defendant's exhibit number 3,
Mhm.
does it have a date that it was received?
Oh, yes, August 11, 2016.
Do you have any independent recollection on whether or not you walked both of these DVDs over on the same day, or was it on separate days?
I don't remember.
And you look at defendant's exhibit number 4,
Mhm.
does it have a received stamp on it like defendant's exhibit number 3?
No,
Do you get any kind of receipt when you drop off evidence with the DA's office?
no.
Do you recall the date that you interviewed Antonio Jones?
I would have to look at the DVD. It's written on there.
Okay, same question for Antonio Pena. Do you recall that date?
No, but it's written on the DVD.
Okay. I'll just leave those up for in case I have more questions.
Bill has them again.
Mhm.
See the originals. 2 DVDs.
So defense exhibit number 4, the interview with Antonio Jones. It says it's stamped received August 11th, 2016 at 8:37 a.m. Would you agree with that?
Yes,
Does that refresh your memory on what day you walked it over to the DA's office?
it must have been August 11th.
Is there anything you sign for the DA's office when you drop evidence off?
No, at that time, no.
And in your defense exhibit, number 5, which is your RMS.
Yeah.
No notation that you conducted these interviews, correct?
No, this is what we would call a rough draft from my RMS notes. This isn't my final product.
Okay, and there's nothing in the RMS for also saying that you interviewed Antonio Pena, correct?
No,
If Antonio Jones' interview was on July 24th, 2016, and Antonio Jones' envelope is file stamped on August 11th, 2016, would the interview taking place on July 24th, 2016 sound correct to you?
it could be. I mean, I can't remember that far back. I could have been out of town for a couple of weeks or something.
And then if Antonio Pena, and the DVD is already in evidence as well, but he was interviewed on August 22nd, 2016.
Okay.
And that's after the date that Antonio Jones was dropped off. Would you agree with that?
Yes,
So it's not possible that Antonio Pena's interview was brought with Antonio Jones. Would you agree?
that sounds logical. Yes, ma'am.
And usually, I mean, you've been a detective, you said, for what,
20 years. Yes,
So you've walked a lot of evidence over to the DA's office, right?
yes,
And do you usually see the person working at the DA's office that files or that stamps received on the evidence?
Sometimes, yes, ma'am.
You see them do that?
Well, do I see them actually stamp it? No,
Yeah.
I use well, it depends on what year it is, and I can't remember the specific procedures. I know that now the procedure is there's a login sheet that we log in additional evidence that we bring over.
So you personally do the login?
Yeah, we write the login, but I don't remember if that was the case in 2016.
Okay. Do you ever just hand evidence, supplemental evidence over to a prosecutor, separate from doing the walk it over and log it in process?
Not normally, no.
Okay. So you have no independent recollection of dropping Antonio Pena interview off, correct?
I mean, it's here, so obviously I dropped it off.
But you have no idea what the date that it was dropped off, correct?
No, ma'am, it had to have been sometime after I conducted the interview.
And you have no personal notes in your RMS notes of dropping any of these interviews off, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you ever talk to a prosecutor about these two particular interviews?
I think just ADA Harris.
You talked to ADA Harris about the Antonio Jones and Antonio Pena interview.
Yes.
When?
Probably after he took over the case and we were going over it.
Prior to trial?
I think so, yeah.
Do you remember the substance of the conversation?
No.
Do you recall asking him any questions about the contents of these interviews?
No. I mean, I think if I remember correctly, this is just, did you interview this person? Do you remember this person? It's more like that. It's not going into the details of what they said.
Okay, well, let's go into the details of what they said.
Okay.
Antonio Jones, he was the first one that you interviewed on July 24th, 2016 during that summer, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you remember his demeanor?
He was, well, for not knowing him, he seemed like he was impaired on something. I don't know what.
He seemed pretty high, correct?
Yes.
Okay. There came a point you were asking him about him showing video of the murder. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And what was his response?
He had never done anything like that.
But he did agree that he had stayed at the motel where he was alleged to have been showing the video.
Yes.
And you didn't believe him, did you?
No.
You thought that he had showed the video to somebody.
I mean, with what I had at the time, I thought he may have had the video. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Has he ever been charged in this case?
No.
And his mom, you also know who his mom is, correct? Is Krista Guetta?
Without reviewing my report, I can't remember what her name is. Maybe Christine something.
Is it Hispanic last name?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you ever believe that she was involved with the murder?
No.
And moving on to Antonio Pena's interview. Antonio, he indicated that he had seen or he'd been told about the video of the murder, correct?
He had been told about it. He had never seen it.
Okay. Do you recall that he knows Antonio Jones's mom?
Yes, I believe so.
And do you recall him talking about when the substance of the murder and the video came up, Antonio Jones's mom was there? Do you remember that part?
I think so. Yes, ma'am.
And she started punching a guy named Roberto, saying you filmed it.
Yes, I remember that. Mhm.
Was that I mean, that was important information. Do you agree?
Yeah, but just someone saying you filmed it or someone saying that someone else said you filmed it. I mean, that they could be talking about anything.
Okay,
Mhm.
but you've never been a defense attorney, right?
No, ma'am.
Just a investigator,
Yes, ma'am.
detective.
Mhm.
So that information, though, I mean, it implies that there's other witnesses that are available, right?
Yes,
And it implies that possibly somebody named Roberto was involved, correct?
correct.
And that would have been important for a defense to know about, correct?
I think I have Roberto documented in my report. I can't remember what the relationship is between him and Christina.
But I mean the substance of Antonio Pena's interview,
Mhm.
what he says about Christine or Antonio Jones's mom and Roberto, that's important. Her saying you filmed it to somebody, that's an important piece of information.
Yes,
Okay. And Antonio Pena also described to you what he heard the killers look like.
I don't remember that.
You don't recall him talking about a skinny black guy?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Do you recall talking about, I mean, R.C. Curtis is not a skinny black guy, correct?
No, he's not.
Especially, apparently he's lost some weight, so back then he was even bigger guy.
Mhm.
Okay, but, so did you, when you had a conversation with Daryl Harris, ADA Harris, did you talk about the substance of Antonio Pena's interview?
I don't recall going detailed by detail, no.
Did you tell Daryl that there was a DVD interview of Antonio Pena
I'm pretty sure I did. Yes, ma'am.
before trial?
I'm pretty sure I did. Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever have any conversations with Elena Altus about this case?
The only, before ADA Harris, the only ADA I remember talking to was Scott Simpson. And I think he retired and went into private practice or something.
Okay, but on the envelopes,
Mhm.
you put attention to Elena Altus, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
why did you do that?
As far as I know, she was like an intake or something at that time. And I needed a person to get it to.
Okay, do you have any knowledge of whether Elena Altus ever received these?
No, ma'am.
And when you say that you had a conversation with ADA Harris about these DVDs, do you recall where you were?
It depends on when. I mean, after he got the case, it was either a phone call or a pretrial conference or something to that effect.
Okay.
Mhm.
Do you have any notes with that regarding that phone call?
No,
Were you talking to him because you were concerned about these DVDs or these interviews?
no.
Were you just mentioning, this is what I did on the case and these are DVDs, these interviews that I had conducted?
Well, when he had the case, I can't remember who brought it up. It's either him asking me questions. Typically in a pretrial situation, it's going to be the prosecutor asking me questions about the case if they have questions.
Okay. So just so that we're clear.
Mhm.
Well, when you file a prosecution guide, you can also file supplements to the prosecution guide.
Yes.
And do you know how many supplements you filed in this case?
As I recall, 2 supplements.
And those supplements never mention the Antonio Jones or Antonio Pena interviews, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Why did you leave out 2 entire interviews from any of your prosecution guides?
I honestly don't remember why I looked through my files this morning to make sure I didn't do reports on these, and I really don't remember why I didn't do reports.
But every other thing that you did in this case, whether it be receive an email or a phone call, you noted it in your prosecution guide, correct?
Not necessarily, no.
Well, you have in your prosecution guide and in your RMS notes when you received a phone call and when you talked to somebody, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so it may not be every single one, but you know
Mhm.
minute details about the case, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
But you didn't note 2 important interviews where people were telling you names of people that were involved in this case. That involved in a murder, correct?
I did not do reports for these 2 interviews.
And in these 2, or in the Antonio Pena specifically, he provides names of who he's known or has heard, has learned committed the murder. correct?
No,
He didn't give you names?
he gave me names, but he doesn't know about anyone being involved in the murder.
Well, who he's heard has been involved in the murder, correct?
I don't recall him saying he's heard they've been involved. These are people that are just repeating things that people are telling them.
But he specifically was present when the subject of the murder came up and he witnessed Antonio Jones's mom punching somebody, asking her, you filmed it, correct? He's a witness to that.
Yes,
Okay. And you didn't put that in a single prosecution guide, correct?
I don't believe so.
And you didn't put it in your RMS notes, correct?
No,
And you don't know if you ever talked to Daryl Harris about the contents of that interview.
I don't remember the specific details of every conversation I've had with Daryl.
But neither Antonio Jones or Antonio Pena in their interviews, you asked them if they knew RC Curtis and they said they didn't know him, right?
That's correct.
I'll pass the witness at this time.
State,
Oh, Melody. Okay.
Detective Heinz.
Yes.
You filed a prosecution guide in this case, I believe in 2016.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and at the time you filed the prosecution guide, I have a copy of it coming downstairs if you need to look at it.
Okay.
At the time you filed the prosecution guide, you had already obtained Antonio Jones's telephones, his cellular phones, 2 of them.
Yes, sir.
And you obtained a written consent to search those phones, didn't you?
It was Detective Tim Angel who got the written consent.
Okay, but you included that written consent in your prosecution guide, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and you put in your prosecution guide that you were, not only that you had the phones, but that you were going to dump the phones or have a download of the contents of the phones, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Look at them right here.
You also put in the prosecution guide that you had spoken to Roberto Cisneros and Cristina Guerrero. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And when you went and spoke with Roberto, initially he seemed hostile to you,
Yes, sir.
but then he called you and you went back and you had a brief interview with him.
Yes, sir. That's
And is-
correct.
And that was at his house?
Yes, sir. That's where he said he was living.
Okay. And you noted that, and he denied any knowledge of the crime or participation. Is that correct?
I don't recall the specifics of the conversation. I haven't listened to it in a long time.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you did put that in your prosecution guide.
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. Now, you also filled out supplemental prosecution guides for relating to an interview you did with Scott Perez, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that was filed like maybe a year or so after the initial prosecution guide.
I'm not sure the exact time frame. It was after the initial case had started.
Okay. And then you also interviewed a gentleman by the name, I don't know if I'm saying his name correct, Cayman Reed.
Actually, I didn't conduct that interview. It was a detective named Ruben Perez because I was at in-service that week
Okay.
when that interview was conducted.
But you did fill out a prosecution guide for that as well, correct?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay, and those were forwarded to the district attorney's office.
Yes, sir.
So you filed you filed your initial prosecution guide and you attached with that several attachments and several DVDs for several
Yes.
witnesses. And then subsequently, sometime around July, August of 2016, you walked over 2 other discs without supplemental prosecution guides, and those were for Antonio Jones and Antonio Pena, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Now, I think it was elicited on direct that you, the Antonio Jones interview was brought to the DA's office sometime early August, I believe August
August 11th, yes.
11th. Now, do you recall doing the Antonio Pena interview August 24th?
I would have to look at the disc. The disc has the date that the interview was conducted.
Okay, So if the disc shows that the interview was conducted after August 11th, that'll speak for itself.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you may have brought that disc over at a later date.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then after you brought the Antonio Jones and Antonio Pena discs, at some point after that, you brought over supplements and interviews discs for Scotty Perez and Cayman Reed.
Yes.
Okay. Now, so the actual interviews that were conducted for Jones, Pena, Perez, and Reed, the contents of those interviews came into your knowledge after the original prosecution guide was filed.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Your Honor, one moment. Hey, Daryl, can you show him the original prosecution guide from the folder, the Cayman Reed supplement, the Scotty Perez supplement, and then Antonio Jones consent form?
Okay, just 32 pages or the whole thing again?
No, just the 32 pages. I don't want to, and if they want to make it complete, that's fine.
And do you also want the audit trail documents?
No, we'll take that up later.
Never mind. May I approach Your Honor?
Yes.
Okay, Judge, can I just let Daryl lay the foundation for this? Because it's going to be a little difficult for me to do it from right here.
Any objection?
No objection.
Yes. And defense, are you requesting that a foundation be laid?
Let me just look at them really quick and we may just be able to waive the whole foundation. We don't object to them being admitted, Your Honor.
All right, so what exhibits are they?
Your Honor, it's State's Exhibit 1, which is the original prosecution guide, 32 pages, held together by a binder clip. And State's Exhibit number 2, it's a 7-page document. It is a supplemental report to State's Exhibit 1. It reflects the interview of witness Scotty Perez. It also contains a information sheet on Mr. Perez, where he lived, his next of kin, etc. And then a 3-page offense report that was Mr. Perez being arrested on May 6th of 16, and that made him available for the interview that was done, which documented in State's Exhibit number 2. And then
I'm sorry, I printed that up. I think that was attached to it. I don't care if that comes in. If the defense is, I just assume that be out unless
Does
the
not have
defense
any
wants it.
objection. I believe it's State's Exhibit 1, 2, and 3.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so any objections to States 1, 2, and 3?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right, and what is State's Exhibit number 3, please?
And State's Exhibit number 3 is a 3-page document. It is a supplement report, has a date of March 7th, 2017, and it reflects the interview conducted by an interview of a Cayman Reed.
All right, then State's Exhibits 1, 2, and 3 is admitted without objection.
And then there's also the Antonio Jones consent.
I apologize, I forgot.
All right, and that'll be State's Exhibit number 4.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, defense, any objection to State's Exhibit number 4?
What was exhibit number 4?
It's a consent form.
Oh, no objections. to that.
All right, State's Exhibit number 4 is admitted without objection.
Okay, may I resume, Your Honor?
Yes.
Okay, Detective Heinz, I want you to
Yes.
look at State's Exhibit number 4.
Okay.
Okay, that's Antonio Jones's consent that you forward attached to what is labeled State's Exhibit number 1. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. No,
And there, to be fair, there were over 100 pages of attachments, but that was just one of many.
yes,
Okay, because you had downloaded other phones, you had done other witness statements, correct?
yes, sir.
Okay. Now, in this case here, at the end of the prosecution guide, can you kind of flip towards the back?
Yes, sir, I'm there.
You made a note about, I guess, some sort of loose ends on the case.
Mhm.
What were those loose ends?
To locate Cayman Reed for an interview, to locate Scott Perez for an interview, and to interview Frank Hernandez.
Okay, now you had already applied for an arrest warrant for RC Curtis, correct?
Yes, sir.
So even though you had loose ends, why did you go ahead and apply for that warrant? Did you have other evidence that compelled you to do so?
Yes, sir, I did.
And briefly state, what was that evidence?
Is DNA located on the victim's body?
Okay, and in what places?
In her mouth, and if I recall correctly, under her fingernails.
Okay, so despite the fact that you had some leads, in this case, because of the gravity of the offense and because of the nature of the incriminating evidence, you chose to get the warrant and forward the case to the DA, correct?
Yes, sir. That's the decision I made after conferring with my supervisor.
Okay. Now I know, when is the last time you watched the interview with Antonio Pena?
Actually, I reviewed it this morning. Yes.
Okay. Now, does he, in his interview, is it fair to say Mr. Pena does not, he never saw the video, is that correct?
He never saw the video. Yes, sir.
Nor does he ever describe anybody as actually committing the murder in the video, is that correct?
No, he never describes that.
Okay. But he does acknowledge that he has heard about a video.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Video or- sorry.
A video.
And give me one moment, Your Honor.
I said video. Yeah. Mhm.
And Antonio Pena said he knew who Roberto was, Roberto Cisneros, correct?
Yes, sir. He did.
And he knew Antonio's mom, who was Christina Guerrero.
Yes, Christina Guerrero.
Okay, but he did not know RC Curtis, correct?
That's correct.
And he knew Frank Hernandez.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Frank Hernandez, and he knew Scott Perez.
Yes.
So Frank Hernandez, Scott Perez, Roberto Cisneros, and Christina Guerrero. All of those people were named in your original prosecution guide, correct?
Okay. Can you repeat the question, sir?
Scott Perez,
Mhm.
Frank Hernandez, Roberto Cisneros, and Christina Guerrero. All of those individuals were named in your original prosecution guide, correct?
Yes, sir.
And three of those individuals, Scott Perez, Roberto Cisneros, and Christina Guerrero, they were specifically mentioned in connection with the murder and or the video of the murder, correct?
Yes, sir. They were.
Okay. Is it fair to say that, so after you do the initial prosecution guide, you obviously are continuing to try to tie up these loose ends, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, it's fair to say you never got the video,
No, sir.
all right? And you tried talking to multiple people about it,
Yes, sir.
okay? And at this point, you don't think you're going to be able to find that video at this point?
No, sir. The information I had that this video was supposed to be on an Alcatel flip phone, and I haven't been able to find any such video or any such phone.
Okay. I'll pass the witness.
On the,
Defense.
I'll pick up right where you left off with the phone. On the Antonio Jones Antonio Jones voluntarily gave over 2 phones. We talked about that, right?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, if you had evidence of a murder on your phone, would you give that over?
Probably not.
Okay,
Mhm.
so when you know that those phones that he gave over were not a flip phone, correct?
I didn't know it was a flip phone until well after that.
When did you learn that it was a flip phone?
When I interviewed Scott Perez, and that would have been, let's see. Okay. Yeah, that would have been May 16th of 2016 is when I learned that the alleged phone that has the video is a flip phone.
So when you talk to Antonio Jones, you actually, I mean, you're telling him that you think he's a liar and that he's not being credible.
Mhm.
You mentioned that he gave you 2 phones, but they weren't the correct phones. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Because he didn't turn over a flip phone to you, right?
And that would have been to Detective Angel. No, but he didn't turn over a flip phone to me. No, ma'am.
Okay, so it's pretty relevant that the guy that's having the finger pointed at him, having video of the murder, gives you the wrong phones, correct?
Yeah.
And it's relevant that you're, as the detective in this case, calling a potential suspect a liar about this evidence that he's giving you, correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, Nathan went through a bunch of names that are listed in this report, like Christina. I think sometimes it's listed as Guerra and sometimes it's listed as Guerrero.
Mhm.
Would you agree with that? Or is it always as Guerrero?
I only know her as Guerrero. If it's Guerra, then it's probably a typo on my part.
Okay. But information is not contained in your prosecution guide when it comes to these people as being involved with the murder, correct?
No, because I don't know that they're involved in the murder.
Well, when Antonio Pena talked to you, they became possible people that are involved with the murder. Would you agree with that?
Possible, yes, ma'am.
And that's what's on his interview, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, before the Antonio Pena interview, did the name David Rocha come up?
Yes.
Okay. But did you learn through Antonio Pena that after this murder, David Rocha fled to Mexico?
No, I don't know that he fled to
On the
Mexico.
DVD, do you remember Antonio Pena telling you he knows a lady that sells houses and he put his house on the market and sold it through this real estate agent?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so
Mhm.
he sold his house, he got
Mhm.
some cash, and he said he took off. He's in Mexico.
Okay.
Do you recall that being on the?
Yeah, I don't remember him saying he's in Mexico. I think he said he may have gone to Mexico or something like that. I don't specifically remember him saying he's in Mexico.
Okay, but we know he sold his house, got some cash and left.
That's what I was told. Yes, ma'am.
That's pretty important. If somebody's being blamed for being a murder suspect, the
Mhm.
fact that they go and sell their house and they're gone, would that be important to turn over?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
And did you talk about any of this stuff with Daryl before trial? Like, hey, what are we gonna do about these other names that were being mentioned as the possible killers on these DVDs? Did you talk to Daryl about that?
Not, you mean in what regard?
Well, on Antonio Pena's interview, he talks about these other people who he's learned committed the murder, and one of them has sold his house and fled the area. Did you bring that up with Daryl? Like, what happens if I get questioned about these alternative suspects?
I don't remember if he brought it up with me or I brought it up with him, but I really don't understand your question.
Okay, in preparation for trial,
Mhm.
do you go over the details of the case with a prosecutor? I've never been a prosecutor, so I don't know how to prepare a detective for his examination. So my question is, when you're meeting with a prosecutor
Mhm.
and going over the case, do you bring up like things that might be bad evidence for your case? Do you bring that up and say, how are we gonna address this? What's your strategy with it?
Yeah, I mean, the prosecution strategy is really not in my purview, so I just talk to them and answer their questions.
Okay, before trial, do you recall Mr. Harris asking you questions about these other suspects that were mentioned in these interviews?
Yes,
He did talk to you about these other people,
yes.
people that were named in Antonio Peña's interview.
I don't specifically recall that, but I mean that, no, I don't recall what names he asked me about.
Did he discuss David Rocha selling his house
I don't recall that specifically, no.
or
Ma'am.
David Rocha disappearing after the murder?
Yeah, he did discuss that.
Daryl Harris discussed with you David Rocha now not being in the area anymore.
Yes,
Did he talk with you about how witnesses identified the killer as a tall, skinny black guy?
I've never heard that before, ma'am.
And you're sure you had these conversations with Mr. Harris pre-trial?
Yeah, before this case went to trial,
This
yes.
case went to trial end of October, beginning of November of 2021.
I don't remember exactly when, ma'am.
Okay. You said that you consulted with your supervisor about filing an arrest warrant on RC Curtis.
Yes.
correct?
Mhm.
You discussed with your supervisor about what evidence should be turned over to the DA's office or made part of your prosecution guide?
Typically our supervisors will go over a case with us, but we don't, I mean, we have too many detectives and too many cases for them to look at every piece of evidence on every case.
Okay, so did you, on this case, did you consult with the supervisor about leaving out the Antonio Jones and Antonio Peña interviews?
I didn't leave them out. I turned them over to the DA.
You left them out of your prosecution guide.
Well, they were interviewed well after the case was filed.
Scott Perez was interviewed well after, and you eventually supplemented your prosecution guide with Scott Perez's information.
That's correct.
And you agree you also did that with Cayman Reed's interview,
Yes, that's correct.
but you did not do it with these two
That,
individuals.
yes, ma'am, that's correct. And
So my question is, did you talk to anybody about about leaving that out of a prosecution guide?
no, I didn't.
Why did you leave it out of your prosecution guide?
I don't think I did reports, and think I've already said that I did not do reports about these two interviews. And to be honest with you, I don't remember why I didn't.
When you had your meeting pre-trial with ADA Harris about these interviews, did he ever ask you why aren't these names in your prosecution guide?
I don't recall him asking me that. No.
Did you guys sit down and watch the interviews together?
No, I don't think so.
So the best of your recollection is these interviews were mentioned during a conversation, but you don't recall talking about the substance of the interviews.
Not every little detail, no, ma'am.
Okay, but you did talk about like David Rocha leaving the area.
Yes. Mhm.
So and that's something you learned in the Antonio Peña interview.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Let me just look at my notes real quick to see if I have any other questions. And when you talked to, you said that you had talked to Scott Simpson, you recall talking to ADA Scott Simpson, correct?
Yes.
And did you ever talk about the Peña and Jones interviews with him?
No.
I'll pass the witness.
Right, state.
regarding about whether you ever discussed Antonio Pena or Antonio Jones interviews with ADA Harris. If you didn't file a prosecution guide supplement, is it reasonable to believe that maybe ADA Harris did not know that he had those discs?
Yes, sir. I guess that's possible.
No further questions.
Your Honor, briefly,
Yes.
then if you just testified that you had a conversation with ADA Harris
Mhm.
about David Rocha going to Mexico, right?
Mhm.
And you testified that you had a conversation pre-trial about the interviews of Antonio Jones and Antonio Pena, correct?
Yes.
So your question or your answer to Mr. Maury was that it's possible that Daryl didn't know about these DVDs. That's not true, is it?
Well, it depends on when you're talking about. I mean, we're talking about a 7-year time span here almost. So I don't exactly when he's referring to, I don't know.
Well, I'm referring to pre-trial. That's my
Okay.
questions.
Okay, so pre-trial would have been any time before October of 2021.
Yes.
Okay.
And during that time period, you said you had conversations with him about Antonio Jones's interview and Antonio Pena's interview, correct?
Yes.
And you talked about things that are contained in the Pena interview at least, correct?
Well, if you're specifically talking about David Rocha, he and Frank Hernandez were suspects. Well, I considered them suspects because they were using the victim's credit cards. I just don't have any physical evidence tying them to the crime scene.
Okay, but my question is, the information about him selling his house, that a real estate agent was used and he got some cash and left the area, you learned that in Pena's interview, correct?
I may have known it before, but yes, Pena talked about that. Yes, ma'am. And if I recall, when I went to look for David Rocha at his last known address, I think I remember a for sale sign being in the front yard and the house was empty.
So a person that you suspect was involved with the murder,
Mhm.
but you just don't have any way to tie him to the crime scene, sells his house right after and leaves the area.
Mhm.
And that doesn't make it into any of your reports?
Well, no, man, not specifically that he sold his house and left the area.
Well, that would have been important, right?
Well, I consider him a suspect, but his behavior doesn't have to make it into my report. I considered him a suspect.
But somebody fleeing or leaving the area, that can be important to know because it can be consciousness of guilt, correct?
If that's what you say, yes, ma'am.
Well, legally, that's what the law says.
Okay.
But all of this information that we've been going over, that stuff that came out of the Antonio Pena and Antonio Jones interviews, like the David Rocha stuff and all of that, even if you learned about it and you heard David Rocha's name, that information that you learned made it in not in a prosecution guide or a report or a note or anything, correct?
The DVDs were submitted to the DA's office, so
Well, the Antonio Jones one has a file stamp saying that it was submitted to the DA's office and it has an initial of Grace Carter, GC on it. But the Antonio Pena one, where you got a lot of information, that one has no notations that it was ever dropped off. You see that on defendant's exhibit number 4?
yes, ma'am.
Right. We do know that eventually the DA's office got it because they have it at this point, but you have no knowledge of when you turned this over, correct?
That's correct.
And all we do know is that mid-trial, when this case was mid-trial, that's when it appeared, correct?
I don't know that, ma'am.
Okay, well, you may not know that. I'll pass the witness.
State.
Do you recall a date in November of 2021 during the trial when Mr. Harris went over to your office?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Do you recall what the reason for him going over to your office was?
I think he wanted a map. There was a map of some cell phone tower sites of Frank Hernandez. I believe was his purpose for coming over there.
Do you remember him asking you about did you remember discussing with him at that point about the Antonio Jones or Antonio Pena interviews?
No, sir.
Do you ever recall him getting on his phone and talking with someone in the DA's office while he was there?
No, sir, I don't.
Okay. Pass the witness.
Can I press the witness for, I know you
Yes.
told me not to ask, sorry. This feels weird doing it without permission.
Mhm.
All right, on State's Exhibit number 2, which is the supplemental prosecution guide where you made note of your interview with Scott Perez. On page 2, you have notes that say, at this time of the report, I can't completely rule out David Rocha as a suspect in the murder of Paula Boyd. This is solely based on the fact that he is using her credit card after she is dead and is apparent going into hiding after the warrants were issued. Do you recall that note?
Yes,
Okay. And you also mentioned a similar thing about Frank Hernandez being still a suspect.
Mhm.
And that it's based on him using the credit card and he's just not cooperating with the investigation in the murder.
yes,
Okay. So even at the time that you wrote the Scott Perez supplemental report, you still had other suspects going on.
in my mind, they're suspects, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And is your report, the supplemental report, is it dated anywhere when you actually wrote it?
No,
Do you have any independent recollection? Turn that over to the state.
it had been after May 16th of 2016.
Okay.
Mhm.
Runner, I would just like to make a note for the record, and if we can directly on it, that they emailed us yesterday information that report was turned over after the trial, the mistrial was declared in this case, where he's noting that he still has suspects that are out there.
State.
I didn't quite hear what she said. I didn't hear all of it. What you were saying
Sorry, I
closer to the
wasn't
microphone.
Sitting at the microphone. I was just gonna make a note for the record that last night or yesterday afternoon, we received an email that supplemental Scott Perez report where he's noting that there are still additional suspects was not turned over to the defense. The report was not turned over to the defense until after the mistrial was granted. I believe it was turned over on November 29th, 2021 was the date.
We plan on addressing that with a different witness.
All right, so then, for now,
I passed the witness.
all right, so the information that this defense has just placed on the record states you're saying that that's not true, or you want to call a witness to address that?
I think they're gonna call Mr. Harris. We'll address it with him.
Okay. All right, any other questions for this witness, state?
No, ma'am.
Defense?
Your Honor.
All right. Is this witness excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you excused, or you can remain to hear the rest of the testimony.
All right, thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome. Defense?
Hi, Judge.
Hello.
We'll call Daryl Harris. You first, you can.
May we do a short recess before Mr. Harris testifies?
Yes.
Thank you.
So everyone will take 10 minutes.
I'll go down with you. Judge, 10 minutes?
Yes. Deputy Mayor, could you mute us and stop video, please? Excuse me, before anyone leaves.
short people on the
You mind
witness.
if we have drinks out on our?
Oh, no, that's fine. Mr. Moray?
Everybody's abandoned.
All right, we are back on. Mr. Harris, if you can raise your, of course, the court knows that you're an officer of the court, but if you can raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give will be the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
So help me God, I do so swear, Your Honor.
All right, and if you could state your name for the record
Daryl Harris,
and spell it, please.
DARYL, Harris, HARRIS.
All right, defense.
Mr. Harris, you were the same Gerald Harris that was the prosecutor that began to handle the R.C. Curtis case in 2018. Is that correct?
Actually, sometime summer to fall of 2017.
Okay. When
But
was
yes.
it that you first learned, and the DA's office, when you have a case that is voluminous as this turned out to be, Ms. Altus testified regarding a grand jury folder, and that's just a manila folder, if you will, that is capable of holding perhaps 100 pages.
Yes, sir.
And what is the standard practice in the district attorney's office as far as storing additional records or files that are too large or too big to fit in that grand jury file?
You expand. Some cases are made up of, in some individual cases are made up of multiple manila folders. We should probably buy stock in office supply stores for all the folding cardboard boxes that we use. That's typically how we handle overflow when it gets too voluminous for that one file.
Okay, and when I met with Ms. Altus today, she referred to one of those boxes as a banker's box. Is that
Yes, that's
similar
accurate.
to what you're describing?
Yes, sir.
And it's one of the boxes, you buy them flat and you put them together, and then
Yes, sir.
was such a box used in this case, or multiple boxes in this case?
Multiple now. I learned of one in January of 18.
Now, how did you come to learn that there was a box in January of 18?
As I testified previously, I rotated into the 399th Family Violence and replaced Mr. Simpson sometime, I would say, the summer to fall of 2017. And in that process between me and him, I acquired the R.C. Curtis file, which was just the manila folder. And I do recall acquiring a 5x7 manila envelope full of individual discs. It's one of those that is one of the defense exhibits. And my first reaction was that's generally kind of light for the charge, which at the time was a capital murder.
Now, you realize that today we're here kind of specifically addressing two similar manila envelopes that both contain DVD interviews purported to have been conducted by Detective Heinz, correct?
Yes, sir. I am aware of that.
And I believe for the purposes of the record, they've been introduced as defense 3 and 4.
Yes, and
Correct.
so to conclude, so I acquired the manila folder, et cetera, from Mr. Simpson. January 15th, 2018. That date stands out to me because myself and my associate at that time, Ms. Hairston, was leaving the family violence section of the office to go to the medical examiner to interview Dr. McLean about the R.C. Curtis murder. And as we walked down that hallway, I got stopped by a staff assistant, Mary Williams, and there was then an ADA Anna Scott at the time. And basically Ms. Scott asked my help because they had a box, a banker's box of material and information, and they didn't understand what to do with it. The specific context was, Daryl, you've been here a while. Do we ever get murders that aren't baby death cases? And it's because we're in the family violence section. I asked them what they're talking about. Williams says that this came over from trial division, CTD. I looked into the box myself and I saw the name of the defendant that I was going to go and talk to the medical examiner about. And I remember being annoyed.
And so that box that date was January 15th of 2018.
Yes,
And did you remain the lead prosecutor on that case from January 15th of 2018 until you and I, along with Stephen and Richard Langlois, began our trial roughly end of October, beginning of November 2021?
yes, sir. We actually picked a jury November the 1st, and the mistrial occurred the following Monday, November the 8th.
And the mistrial occurred as a result of specifically these two DVDs, correct?
Yes, that's accurate.
And at the time of the mistrial, the trial was already in recess because it had been determined through a witness on the stand that perhaps there were some cell phone records that had not been turned over to the defense as perhaps should have been turned over, correct?
Turned over is literally correct. Both sides were aware that they were in existence.
And at the time of that recess, the judge that heard the trial is the same judge that's here today, Judge Stephanie Boyd. She instructed you and your office to make sure that there's nothing else out there that we don't know about, right?
Yes,
And she was adamant about that.
absolutely.
And it's after that pronouncement from her, I believe it was at lunchtime. I don't know if it was the same day or lunchtime the next day. You called me, as I recall, and said, I found some more stuff.
Yep.
And you were specifically talking about the two videos marked states 3 and 4.
Yes,
Defense. And those are the statements of Antonio Jones and Antonio Ramos.
yes.
Okay. Now, Pena,
Pena.
Pena. I'm sorry. Thank you. Where am I correct? Remember, you told the court at a previous hearing you found those two DVDs inside this box that you retrieved January 15th of 2018.
Yes, I recall saying that and was said at the moment without reviewing notes, and I've got what's more accurate portrayal. What actually happened is pursuant to the court's order. Myself, Mr. Spear, my intern at the time, we went down to public safety headquarters and sat down with Detective Heinz to go through the entirety of his case file. And as we were doing that, and we got through the back pages, where Mr. Jones's name is mentioned, because this whole thing started about the phone dumps from Jones. And in that conversation, Detective Heinz then said, I interviewed Jones. And I literally said, you what? I interviewed him. Where the hell is that? Said, I sent it to the DA's office. And that's when I called my advocate from public safety headquarters, told her to look through everything. She called us back 30 minutes or so later and told me that she had found an interview of Jones and another one of a name I didn't recognize, Pena. We then made copies of it. I called you, and as I recall, you were on your way to lunch. We met. I handed you a copy and also delivered a copy to Mr. Langlois, myself. And then over the course of that weekend, you may recall, as we were both viewing the phone dumps, we talked about the phone dumps and we talked about those interviews. My impressions is that it was new to both of us.
Correct. Now, and today you heard Detective Heinz testify contrary to what you've just told us.
Yes, I heard that.
And it's his testimony that he discussed with you specifically both of these individuals in what he described as a pre-trial setting or a preparation for trial. And that seems to contradict what you've told us here today. Would you like to expound on that?
Yes, I believe the detective is mistaken. We did have numerous pre-trials with him. We had a We had pre-trials in 18 with the family plan and strategy. We had pre-trials going into the suppression hearings that began in March of 20. And we did pre-trial probably a week to 10 days before the actual trial. To my notes, I never questioned him about Jones, even though his name is mentioned in the guide, because by the guide, he voluntarily given up information and we didn't find it to contribute to the case. And I had no information that Perez had been interviewed at the time and didn't know that Pena existed. So I never questioned him about those interviews pre-trial.
Do you have those notes? You said you reviewed your notes from the pre-trial. I mean, do you have those notes that show the notes you took with Detective Heinz when you did these pre-trial interviews where he neglected to mention these people?
I don't have them myself. I'll have to check with my advocate. She tends to take notes when I have interviews. But I know I didn't question him on it.
Well, I got the impression.
Let me rephrase. So I know I didn't talk to him as I prepped him. I was prepping him because his purpose was to introduce the scope of the investigation, the video from the pony keg that has defendant Curtis, and how he followed up with the Walmart receipts and the card. And that was his purpose. So I never talked to him about those other witnesses.
Okay, so I was earlier. I got the impression that you'd reviewed your notes prior to testifying today. Is that not the case?
A more clear statement is reviewing my recollections of when I talked with Heinz and how often. But I myself, in preparation, I did not take notes myself. My advocate, Ms. Gillian, she's who we called. And so if she took notes of our pretrial with Heinz, I would have them probably on a hard disk if we were made. So I'll happily look to provide that.
So as I understand it, you're saying when you pre-trialed with Heinz, you did not discuss Antonio Jones' role in what we later learned was his potentially being at the scene of the murder. You didn't discuss that with Detective Heinz at that time, correct?
I did not, and exception to the question, there's no evidence of him potentially being at the murder. Scotty Perez says that he says Jones had the video at a party, but Perez never identifies anyone in the video.
Right. He does identify a tall, skinny black guy.
Check. And
how would have you seen the video of Antonio Jones?
yes.
How would you describe him physically?
Tall, skinny black guy. Okay. And then he says the reason he tells Pena is because I saw the skinny black guy at Pena's house.
Now, you also did not discuss the bulk of Scotty Perez because you said at that time you didn't know.
I did not know he'd been interviewed. I thought he had only talked to Heinz in January, gave them the Jones name that led to Roberto and Christina. I knew that police had followed those leads and they didn't appear to produce any fruit. And so I thought the Perez thing was a dead end.
And then regarding Mr. Pena, of the missing DVDs, Antonio Jones and Antonio Pena, would you agree with me that Mr. Pena's DVD is much more informative?
It's the one that any diligent advocate, either side, would want to follow up. That I think would be the best way. But as we discussed that weekend, he says 3 times, I did not see the video. I did not see the video. Right. Everyone's reacting to what Perez says, and Perez can't specify when he saw, can't specify who he saw, just that he saw it. And so obviously, because the state had it, the defense should have gotten it. And had I been aware that I had it in my possession, you would have had it.
And you say any diligent work on either side would have investigated further based on what's on Eduardo Antonio Pena's interview, correct?
You would have talked to Pena about the facts and circumstances. You would have tried to find the Cisneros. Yes.
Well, the person that didn't follow up on any of that is Detective Heinz, the same Heinz that you're now saying basically gave false testimony about talking to you about these cases.
I said I thought he was mistaken.
Okay, his testimony was incorrect,
I think
You're-
so.
right?
I think so.
Okay. And he is correct that he did not follow up on anything he learned from the Pena video, correct?
That's true. But again, he learned that Pena hadn't seen the video and you don't know it exists.
But the Pena video is the reason we know now that perhaps Christina and her husband are involved, correct?
We know that they had a reaction that people watched.
And they had a specific
Well-
reaction when Christina physically struck her husband or her boyfriend and said, and I quote, "Y'all filmed that?" Right? You remember, we both heard that and were stunned when we heard that, correct?
Yes, that is accurate.
Because that implies his presence.
It does.
And that implication is something that a diligent party, either defense had we known, DA's office had they known, or more importantly, San Antonio Police Department, who in fact did know, right? And they knew as early as August the 11th of 2016.
Yes,
And would you agree with me that by not allowing the defense to have that evidence, and I'm not saying you didn't allow us to, but by the defense not having that evidence back in 2016, when it became available, it creates severe harm to the defendant in his ability to locate witnesses, perhaps, or to prepare for his defense. Because now there are alternative suspects
or co-defendants.
or extra witnesses, eyewitnesses perhaps,
Or
correct? Or
co-defendants.
co-defendants. Right, all of that, and the defense should have had the ability from 2016 to investigate those issues, correct?
If everything had worked as the system is designed and intended, yes, the defense should have had them.
And from January the 15th of 18 until whatever that date was,
November 1st of
first week of November,
check.
more or less, 2021, those discs somehow managed to sit unnoticed in that box.
Yes,
Well, the difficult question for me to ask you is, how's that possible?
I understand. It's a difficult question
And
to sit here and answer.
You and I have worked together for almost 30 years.
I would tell you, it's part and parcel. I did a inspection of the banker's box. I saw the same prosecution guide that I had in my Brad folder. I saw ancillary cases on Hernandez and Rocha. I saw innumerable duplications of the same material. And I presumed that my predecessors had all applied the system correctly. But it was not something I became aware. I wasn't aware of either of them until being in Detective Heinz's office November 5th of 2021.
So are you also saying Heinz is incorrect when he said that y'all discussed David Rocha's fleeing the country as a result of this?
Only in a passing moment, asked if he had any lead, occasionally I may have said, any leads on Rocha? At which point he had none. That was always curious. Practice, I've been in this office and practiced for 20 years. So any intimation that someone would flee to the next international border, Mexico, is kind of the norm. Ultimately, Rocha was taken into custody in the state of Florida in June of 2021. He was brought back into Bexar County. I interviewed him then. He gave a voluntary statement. And that's when I learned from Rocha about his selling his house. He used Frank Hernandez's mother. When police went to, once Rocha and Hernandez had been identified, once police released Walmart surveillance video, the video of the defendant in the pony keg, once that got released to the public on or about October 29th through November 1st of 15, I believe ultimately, as we learned from the Pena interview, Pena's wife came forward, identified Rocha and Hernandez. That led police to get warrants for their arrests. They tried to execute those on November 4th of 15. Rocha was gone. They found Hernandez's girlfriend, Bianca Dunn, interviewed her. And Hernandez was arrested sometime later. And then I believe after the mistrial, then I also interviewed Hernandez, CC'd you a copy of that interview, et cetera. And that helped shape my understanding of how they interacted in and around Mr. Curtis. The connection was Mr. Curtis's next door neighbor, Barnett. He brought both of them into Curtis's life and enabled him to pass the credit cards on to Rocha.
Now, when we learned from Mr. Pena, we learned of the involvement of Christina Guerrero, correct?
Yes,
And her-
only in the fact that she, if you believe Pena said what he saw, she understood what Pena was accusing Hernandez of, and she reacted angrily to her paramour, Roberto.
And that's Robert Cerveros? Or-
Yes.
Okay. And we also learned in those two DVDs that Antonio Jones has a brother.
Yes.
And Antonio Jones' brother is also and we learned that he was a tall, skinny black man.
Yes.
Because we did not have, or because nobody wanted to possibly find the real killer, nobody showed a picture of that person to Scott Perez, did they? To your knowledge?
I don't think they did, principally because Jones didn't get interviewed until after Perez's interview in May of 16.
But you got the cell phones from Antonio in January, correct?
Yes, police went to his door. He voluntarily gave two over. And it was also in his interview in May when he then gives the extra detail of an Alcatel flip phone.
So you would agree with me that Robert Cerveros, based on what we learned from Pena, whether it's true or not, is somebody of interest regarding this case, and the defense would probably want to talk to him, correct?
Yes, I would agree. Any skilled advocate would want to do that. Yes.
And the same can be said for Christina or Antonio's mother, Christina Guerrero, or Christina Guerrero, whatever her name is.
Yes.
And then Scott Perez's brother, Anthony. That name was brought up in those videos, correct?
I don't recall Anthony. I only recall Pena saying that Perez described two skinny black kids. In this world, no one knows names.
But what we did know about R.C. Curtis back at that time, nobody would confuse him with a tall, skinny black kid.
True.
Okay. That being said, if Pena's interview that you saw describes the tall, skinny black guy, that would automatically, at least in my understanding of the law, that would be considered Brady evidence. Would you agree with me on that? Because it potentially mitigates the defendant's guilt because the killer was potentially or possibly a tall, skinny black guy.
I disagree that it mitigates Mr. Curtis's guilt, and that's not the definition of Brady as I understand it. Now, it is the state's obligation to turn it over. That I do agree with you. And again, had I been aware that I had it, I would have turned it over. I think you would have to agree. I believe we've done it on this case, but once you came on it, assigned to the case January of 19, we talked about the file and what you knew. You told me that you had gained minimal from your predecessors. And I believe I offered and you took me up on it. You brought a hard disk to my office and I copied what I had in my file, my working file, so
correct.
that you would be accurate. And the fact
Just
that,
so I can stop you there, that working file did not include the DVDs
Nope.
of Pena,
no, it did not.
Jones, or Perez,
No,
correct?
no, it did not, which again, is, I say, I
No.
didn't know that they were in existence.
You and I and Ms. Jones had a, if you will, a Zoom meeting a couple of days ago.
Yes,
And I specifically, or perhaps Ms. Jones asked you specifically, did you consider those two DVDs, Brady? And at that time, you told me you did.
yes, I did say that. And then afterwards, I actually looked the definition up of Brady in Black's Law Dictionary. And I am restating my answer. Clearly, you didn't have to go to Brady. 3914 says that we have to give it to you. And which is why ultimately the only thing I can say is that immediately upon finding out its existence, I notified you, made copies of it, and delivered it to you.
Having said that, and having said that, you agree that it absolutely should have been turned over. Do you agree that the mistrial at the time was warranted?
Yes,
Do you agree that that evidence could be viewed as favorable to the defendant in some light?
in some lights, yes. Mine is it, but I believe even at the time, your late co-counsel even argued in the hearing, it doesn't exculpate it, it makes him a co-defendant, were his exact terms, his exact words, excuse me,
That is one alternate theory, correct?
espoused by his lead counsel.
And you have been, has that box been in your care custody control since January the 15th of 18 until the
Yes.
day you found those discs, or until now? I don't know where it is now, but
It's in tatters, but it's still in my office. And yes, I acknowledge that because ultimately when they were found in my present office by my advocate that didn't work with me in 2018. And so I'm the common denominator to get it there. So I must have had custody. And I acquired it from trial division. Now, at the time in January, both Ms. Jansen and Mr. Simpson were both in trial division. I just can't tell you with precision which of them sent it over. Because I had interacted with Mr. Simpson to take over what had been his docket, I have my doubts that he had it.
tell me again the name of the advocate that found that on that fated day when you were notified of these two DVDs. Who was the advocate that found them in the box?
My present advocate, Ms. Yudi Gillian, Yudi, Y-U-D-I, G-U-L-L-I-O-N.
Okay, and she's present today, I believe, correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I have with this witness, Judge.
State.
Mr. Harris,
Yes, sir.
I want to talk about Mr. David Rocha. Why was he a person of interest?
He was observed using the credit cards of the deceased the day after the body was found at 3 different Walmarts in the area.
Okay. Continue.
And once he was identified, then police went to pursue him, and he was gone. And then as I later learned, he acknowledged to me that he fled and was a fugitive until Detective Heinz called me the middle of June 2020 21. I think we had a July trial date at the time, and said that he had been arrested and returned into Bexar County.
Now, what happened with that July trial date? Do you recall?
Once Rocha was here, I reported it to the judge, asked her to assign him an attorney such that I could talk to him and interview him in connection with this case, since he had always been a person of interest.
And just, he was a fugitive under what, for what was he a fugitive for?
A minimum credit card theft, but because the credit card theft, using Mrs. Boyd's cards at the Walmart the day after the murder, you don't know what his connection is to the murder.
All right, and let me stop you just for a moment, just so everyone can be clear. The complainant in this case is not related to me in any
Sure.
way. So I want that to be clear on the record, because I don't know if it was made clear at the trial. You may proceed.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Judge. So he had an arrest warrant for crimes involving the complainant's credit cards arising that was connected to this murder.
Yes, sir.
And that was known from the get-go, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
And the defense knew about that, correct?
Both this council and their predecessors. Yes, sir.
And in the July, and there's a trial record for this, but in that July, I guess we'll call it a hearing, a continuance hearing. There was an agreed continuance because Mr. Rocha had been apprehended and brought back to Bexar County, correct?
Yes, sir.
And everybody acknowledged that he may have important information, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And just to be clear, the first time you knew about the Antonio Pena and Antonio Jones statements was when you were at Public Safety Headquarters during a trial recess back in November of 2021.
Yes, sir. That's the first time I knew that Perez and Jones had been interviewed. And in investigating and finding that, I found out that Pena's statement existed. And then we go back to see what's already been in discovery. And we found—
I'm going to get to that in a second.
Okay.
Let me first ask you, so how did you come about that?
Again, we were instructed by the court, and I like to believe I'd have done it anyway without the court's instructions. We went down to go over item by item everything in Detective Heinz's file.
Mhm.
And as we got through witnesses, witness statements, what was found, we come to the last page again, and he mentions that he interviewed Jones. And I was surprised because I wasn't aware that Jones had been interviewed. Neither had Mr. Spear. We had that reaction, and then I called Ms. Guillen and just told her to go through everything, look for it. And she called me back and says, we found this, and she had already checked what was in the registry and said, and we found what turned out to be the Pena statement.
Okay, now you have some items down there. Okay, I'm not in court with you. Do you have those items with you?
Can you describe the specific items? Are
The
you
first
talking
is
to—
it's an index of items in the state's possession, and it has on the top of it November 1st, 2021.
Yes, Your Honor, may I move about the courtroom? I believe I have what you are referring to as the index, which is now marked as States Exhibit number 5 for identification.
Okay, now what is that?
States Exhibit number 5 for identification is I believe, 53. It's a 50-plus page document, which is a printout of all bits of evidence in discovery for the R.C. Curtis murder, which is judicial number 1730622. And it has
Okay, you recognize that number. What is that number?
that is the judicial number for the case, which has also the indictment number for this murder file.
Okay, and what's right under that?
November 1st, 2021, 4:56 and 57 seconds.
And what is
PM.
that significant of?
That is the date and time that this 50-plus page index from the evidence repository was produced and printed off.
Okay, now what are the line items that we see below it?
The line items, it's approximately 20 per page. They reflect the filing numbers for evidence as it is uploaded into the registry, a title, which gives an oral description. It's as accurate as the individual submitter makes it. An indicator whether or not it is discoverable, i.e. available to defense, and a page count. And it proceeds that way through all 50-plus pages.
Okay, now is there a tab marker on that one?
Yes, at approximately 3 pages from the last page, there is a green tab affixed to, I guess this would be page 47 or 48.
Okay, and what is that?
That tab lines up with serial number item 17176-19er-060. And the title of that, it's a video, and it is a video of the Scott Perez interview from May 6, 2016, and it is marked discoverable.
Okay, and what is under that?
Underneath that is a video Cayman Reed interview from March 6, 2017. And then another entry that also says Cayman Reed interview, that's part 2. It was too large to upload in one string, also dated 3/6/17.
Okay, now the next thing I'm going to ask is maybe a little difficult, and I'm sorry I'm not down there. If you go kind of in the middle of the packet, there's more than 100 line items that refer to the medical examiner's office. If you could go to the first page after the last medical examiner line item.
First page after?
After it, it's going to be roughly a little past the center of
Okay.
the packet. Sorry, they're not page numbered.
I'm looking at it. And are you referring to the Cayman Reed witness statement?
Yes.
That is on page. It has been entered appropriately, also marked discoverable.
Okay. Now going back to the videos that Cayman Reed, that's containing the statements of Cayman Reed and Scott Perez, when were those uploaded? And I think you may have a document addressing that.
Check. Again, Your Honor, may I move about the will?
Yes. And everyone, because there's not a jury here, and I understand that Mr. Murray is in his office due to an unknown illness, that hopefully he knows what it is. Everybody, you have the ability to move throughout the courtroom freely.
And Judge, for the record, I have a negative COVID test right here that my wife brought for me to take.
All right, thank you. And I appreciate you not coming down to the courtroom. And everyone, the court is going to take its break at 3:30 because there are other things I need to take up with regards to staff in this courtroom. But I anticipate we will finish this today.
And, okay, and Counselor, I've got marked States Exhibits numbers 6, 7, and 8 for identification. States Exhibit 6 for identification is a 2-page printout from the repository Veripic system for the prosecution guide. States Exhibit 7 for identification is a 1-page printout documenting the import and upload for the Scott Perez supplement. And States 8 for identification is also a 1-page document documenting the upload of the Scott Perez video interview.
Okay. So when was the Scott Perez video interview uploaded?
On July 7th, 2021.
Okay, now when was the Scott Perez supplement uploaded?
November 29th, 2021.
Why were they uploaded at different days?
When it was done pre-trial, the prosecution guide, the supplement, had not been found, is the most logical and most truthful answer.
But as far the video, well, actually, this may be a better question for Steve, but you did not upload the Scott Perez prosecution supplement until November 11th, 2021.
Yes, and the distinction, the video itself was uploaded by a paralegal that worked with the 399th District Court. After the mistrial was declared and pursuant to the court's orders and our own desire to go through everything, we found that we could not verify the supplemental report had ever been, so we uploaded it ourselves, November 29th of 21.
But the video had already been uploaded about 4 months prior to trial.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Cayman Reed's video and his prosecution supplement had been uploaded prior to trial.
Yes, sir. March of 2017.
Okay, both of them?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, actually, the video, was that uploaded in March of 17 or was that uploaded at the time?
If I recall specifically, both the Reed report and video were both uploaded when they came contemporaneous with them coming into the office in 2017.
Okay. So at any point, did you ever, with knowledge that the Antonio Pena or Antonio Jones, did you ever have any knowledge that those videos existed and then intentionally withhold them?
No, sir.
Okay. The moment you had knowledge that those videos existed, what did you do?
I informed Mr. Bunk and late co-counsel Mr. Langwa, made duplicates and hand delivered them to each of them myself.
At the time that the judge was considering granting a mistrial, and at the time defense moved for mistrial, had you presented evidence that human cells were collected from underneath the complainant's fingernails and from her mouth during the autopsy?
Yes, sir. The medical examiner, Dr. McLeod, was the first leg in the chain of custody, and that was an explicit part of my direct exam with him. And those evidentiary items were marked, being the medical kit.
Did
from the autopsy.
you,
They had been
Did you-
admitted into evidence, excuse me.
and did you call another witness after you called Detective Heinz?
I don't believe one was called after Detective Heinz. We took the recess while Detective Heinz was on the stand. And then I found and I went down to Public Safety Headquarters and downloaded the cell phone, the Cellbrite reports
Do you
onto a flash drive.
Let me pause you. Do you recall calling a Detective Richardson after Detective Heinz testified?
He did not testify at trial. You're referring to the pre-trial, the suppression hearing.
If volume 17 of the reporter's record establishes that a Detective Richardson came in and testified that he took a buccal swab from RC Curtis. Do you recall that?
Vaguely, he wasn't my witness, but vaguely.
Is it possible you maybe left the courtroom because of the matter with Detective Heinz?
Quite possible. I was
All right.
fairly animated during the recess about it.
Judge, just
In fact, if I could restate, that is highly likely because it is Judge Boyd's intent that we use the whole day. And I was probably out having a conversation with Heinz in the hallway, and co-counsel Mr. Spear would have followed me. Our schedule had us alternating witnesses.
Give me 1 second, Your Honor. All right, Judge, at this point, can I just take up a quick formality?
Yes,
The court reporter in this case has prepared a record of all the proceedings from, I guess, the first time it came into the 187th up until after the mistrial. There was a bond hearing, there was a motion heard, and I would like the court to take notice of the entire trial record for this case.
all right, defense.
We have no objections to that. If we want to move that it be made a part of this entire record, we can do that as well. That goes-
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what Dana just said.
Everybody's whispering for some reason.
I've never been accused of whispering before. I said we have no problem taking note of the record. If we want to move it into this record, if it needs to go up on appeal, then we can do that as well.
Okay. So the court reporter is
I'll
in
take
position.
judicial notice of it.
Thank you. I'll just note, because it's already in the record now, that on it was Mr. Spear who was questioning, not Mr. Harris, but Mr. Spear questioned Detective Richardson after Detective Heinz had left the stand in volume 17, which was taken down on November the 4th, 2021. So Mr. Harris, back to you.
Yes, sir.
What was Detective Richardson's role in this case?
I think on October 27th of 15, Defendant Curtis was taken into custody before a bond violation on a misdemeanor case. And while Detective Heinz was supervising the search of his apartment, Detective Richardson took his voluntary interview and collected his voluntary buccal swab.
Okay. What significance did that buccal swab play in the trial?
It allowed the analysts from the Bexar County Crime Lab to develop a genetic profile from his buccal swab, and that was used to identify a DNA profile foreign to Ms. Paulita Boyd from the slides taken during the autopsy, both the nail clippings and the oral cavity swab.
Okay. did you also have prepared to testify a witness from the crime lab who did that analysis?
Yes, the analyst, Jamie Pomacall, and also a Robert Sailors. They had pre-trialed, had testified during the suppression hearings, and they were both scheduled to testify at the appropriate point in time during the state's case in chief.
And just so the record's clear, I believe what the court has taken judicial notice of includes multiple pretrial hearing dates involving expert testimony, and you're referring to those
Yes,
hearings.
sir.
Okay.
They started on or about March 4th of 20, and then due to COVID, we finally concluded in January of 21.
And the ruling at the conclusion of those hearings was that evidence, that you would be able to present evidence that matched R.C. Curtis's known sample to the unknown samples recovered from the fingernails and the mouth of the victim, correct?
Yes, that was the plan, and that's what the state's case was building to.
Okay, now, in light of the nature of that evidence, and that was your intent to put that evidence on, what significant, at the time that you were pre-trialing, doing the pre-trial hearings, doing whatever pre-trial negotiations you were doing pre-trials with witnesses, what significance did you play? What significance in your own mind did you place on the possibility that there was a video and that Antonio Jones's phones had been taken into evidence?
It was the last of the pages in the prosecution guide. I'd seen the names. If I discussed any other names other than Curtis Rocha Hernandez with Detective Heinz, it was simply, okay, somebody named Perez said he saw it. That led you to Harris. He gave you phones, no video found. And I thought it had been tied off. And so I definitely never mentioned any interviews with him or talked to him about him, and did not know that the name Pena existed. I was also, even though we had custody, I was not aware of the Perez supplement.
Now, when you were aware of the Perez supplement, what exactly was it that you and Udi were doing?
After the mistrial had been granted, we went back and looked at everything in the depository, and we looked at everything we had physical hard copies of. If we had a hard copy of something that we couldn't find in the repository, we scanned it, uploaded it, added it to the index, and then prepared copies for both. I believe we had a box for both Mr. Langlois and Mr. Bunk just because it was voluminous. And so we did that with everything, updated the discovery index. I e-filed it with the court December 13th of 2021, and then called both Mr. Langlois and Mr. Bunks to come pick up their physical copies. If there were any videos, etc., we burned it all to a Blu-ray disc because of its larger capacity, and gave box of paper so that we could state, now, to the best of my knowledge, both counsel have everything that the state has. Now, since that date, as we've continued to acquire things, for instance, Detective Heinz tried to get updated bank records. Even though that was unsuccessful, that data has been added to the discovery index. To prepare for this hearing, counsel asked me to direct the detective to produce his RMS notes. He sends them to me. I give them to defense. That information is also added to the discovery index, and I'll file an update after these proceedings. All of that, as I told the court at the time, I'm the lead prosecutor. ultimately the responsibility is mine. And it is my job to ensure that all disclosure and ethical requirements are adhered to, and that's how we intend to go about doing it. So that's the reason we did it.
You have a physical box or one of the, I don't know if it's a box or one of those kind of accordion boxes. Do you, if a defense attorney, as a matter of practice, as a matter of practice for you, if a defense attorney asks to review the physical box, will you accommodate that request?
Yes. Unlike Ms. Altus, my preferences, maybe a bit more comfortable with the digital data. I frequently just say, give me a hard disk and I'll copy it all, or I'll have somebody download it for you. But I do believe, and I try to take my ethical obligations seriously. I'm responsible. I won't hide from that, but to some degree, this is a professional embarrassment.
Do you regret, I understand you testified previously that you accepted that granting the mistrial was an appropriate ruling. Do you regret what has happened and the fact that you will have to retry the case to a different jury?
No.
Well, let me rephrase that. Is retrying the case to a different jury, is that going to be more difficult for you?
I don't believe so. There are things now that I can anticipate the defense will raise that I'll have to plan on defending against. But the evidence that was on hand that I believe led my predecessors to indict the defendant is still the evidence that we have today. And
let me focus in on a particular witness. Detective Richardson what is his status now with the SAPD?
He had retired, I believe, the week before case in chief, November the 1st.
Mm-hmm.
While I haven't had verbal communication with him, I'm been told he will still be willing to come in to testify on a retrial. One never knows until you actually get a witness subpoenaed.
Can that be more difficult once a police officer is retired to call
without a doubt
into court?
Without a doubt.
So, and you would, because of you said yourself, because the role that DNA plays in this case, you will have a potentially more difficult time with a second trial because of his retirement status.
Yeah, that is accurate. It's the theoretical material is the same. The practicality, as the case continues to age, witnesses have different things come into their lives that make them less amenable to do their public duty. Those are additional factors and concerns. Yes.
Okay. And at the time you did this trial, you had all your witnesses, including, most importantly, the ME who collected the unknown samples, the detective who collected the known samples, and the forensic witnesses who were going to connect those two together as circumstantial evidence of the defendant's guilt. You had those witnesses ready, and in the case of the detective and the ME, they had already testified.
Yes, sir.
And there was no, there were no, you'd already had a pretrial ruling on the admissibility of some evidence. So there were no rulings that occurred during the course of this trial that for you made obtaining a guilty verdict difficult. Is that correct? That was a sloppy question. Let me rephrase it.
I'm not going to try to jinx anything. I believe that to that point of the mistrial, generally the evidence had come in fairly well.
Okay, and you did not, the evidence you intended to present to make him guilty, to get the jury to believe he's guilty. There was nothing that was going to prevent you from getting that in. You had the witnesses ready to go.
I had the opportunity, provided we didn't screw it up on direct. Yes.
Okay. I'll pass the witness, Judge.
But you would agree with me, the key to this issue is we did not have the opportunity to help you screw it up.
That is accurate. Yes, sir.
You have the San Antonio Police Department, who I understand is acting on the state's behalf, correct?
That is fair.
And we pick a jury, we're in the trial, we take our first recess because the prosecution guide talks about a cell brite extraction, correct?
Yes, sir.
But I had asked you repeatedly before trial if there was an actual cell phone dump, and it was your understanding there was not, correct?
Yes, sir. I did not hone in and focus on that last.
And you earlier referred to perhaps you being in an animated state at some point of the trial. And that was because Heinz testified that, oh yeah, there's a cell phone dump, and you had no idea that was there, correct?
Yes, sir. That is accurate.
So we have the trial after, in the case, the offense date is what day?
Offense date, October 21st, 2015.
And this trial is happening November 1, 2021, so 6 years.
Yes, sir.
And not until the middle of trial, we find out about the phone dump. And the reason you went over to the PD, as I understand it from your testimony, is you were going to get some cell phone tower extraction maps that you had never seen before, correct?
Not correct as you phrase it. So after we broke on Thursday, the 4th,
Yes.
I went down, detective said the cell brite report, the phone dumps are on the servers at PD headquarters. It's over 20 gigs. It's too voluminous to send directly. So we went and downloaded it ourselves. Then on Friday, we found about the existence of the two statements that we didn't know we had.
But I thought you found out about those tapes when you were at the PD.
Yes, on Friday the 5th.
Okay.
And then over the weekend, preparing for the hearing that's coming up Monday. The prosecution guide also dictates that the SAPD had the FBI map the phone records of Frank Hernandez. And the way that those items were uploaded into Veripic, they were not clearly distinguishable. That's the evidence repository. And so out of an abundance of caution, I got those from Heinz Sunday. So that would be November the 7th, had copies made, handed it to you the morning of the 8th. Since that time, as we were doing our complete review at the end of November, we found that the maps had in fact been uploaded in the repository and available.
Do you agree with me that perhaps it was erroneous not to have done the complete review prior to that point?
I would believe that I'd agree with you that that's 2020 hindsight. You will, when we get a retrial, I'll also bring you into my office to go over everything that I have.
Now you talk about how great the trial was going, but part of that is because it was a hide the ball from the defense strategy. I mean, Heinz testified, did he not?
Yes, he testified.
And he never mentioned alternative suspects. That he never mentioned y'all filmed that. He never mentioned tall, skinny black guy. All of this, he had personal knowledge, and according to him, you knew about it as well. That was never talked about in the trial. So the trial was going well for you because y'all had the game plan, and we were just trying to guess. We're like picking out which shell the penny's under, because we don't know the things that y'all know. So it was going well for you. It was going terribly for us because we weren't being played fair. Would you agree with me?
No, sir.
You don't think I could have questioned Heinz differently had I known of the existence of those things?
I disagree that it was going well for the state because you didn't have those things. The medical examiner's testimony stands.
Did
The
she see
the video evidence of your client being in front of an ATM machine at the time the body is being carried out of her apartment stands.
So somebody else carried
evidence-
the body out? I mean, there's a lot of alternative theories, correct?
My point, as you phrased it, why was it going well? And that is my belief as to why it was going well. Now, your ability to question, cross-examine Detective Heinz for not following up on things people said, I agree with you. You were denied that opportunity. I don't believe it would have been as impactful as you believe.
So the detective telling the jury that a witness told me the killer was a tall, skinny black guy. And then I say, RC, stand up, and they see that he's not, you don't think that would be impactful?
It
When the
doesn't
detective
exonerate.
says it doesn't
Once-
match him?
Once the testimony comes in that his is the only DNA evidence that no tall, skinny black guy is using the cards, no, I don't believe it been impactful. It means there's someone he's not telling you about if it's true.
We don't
Just
know what's
answering your
true.
question, sir.
Yeah, I agree. The problem is it's too little too late. You had a box. But we agree now it was erroneous that nobody went through it. The police department, acting as an agent for the state, were withholding things. They supplement Cayman Reed's statement, which is about as valuable as this Nutter Butter cookie to this trial. I mean, it's worthless. We all agree what Cayman Reed said was absolutely worthless. But it is supplemented, and Mr. Morey wants to make sure the judge knows, everybody knows about Cayman Reed, because what he said doesn't matter. The problem that Nathan has and the state has is the stuff that does matter. They can't show the judge where that was given to us because it never was. Only the things that didn't matter, like Cayman Reed or Scott Perez's statement that we know now was not truthful. So
Wait a minute. What
issues
about
we have-
Scott Perez's statement wasn't truthful?
Well, because Pena contradicts everything Perez says. But we don't get to find out about that because once again, we didn't have the information, right?
You did have
Pena's
Perez's,
information,
you had Perez's statement.
right? And you agree with me that Pena gives a whole different version of what Perez saw and said.
I don't think it's different. Perez's statement focused on what he claims he saw on the video.
Mhm.
Pena's statement, and then Perez says, a week or so after I saw it, I was at Antonio Pena's house and I saw the skinny black kid there.
Once again, but that skinny black kid's not important other than being described as the killer on the video.
My point is, it doesn't contradict, as your question was phrased.
It contradicts the trial we were having because the skinny black kid killer is not this guy. So there's
No
there's
one
that
said the black
contradiction.
kid was a killer.
Oh, Pena says that was
No, sir.
absolutely discussed.
He does not say that.
Okay.
He says,
So-
I never saw the video 3
What-
times.
What's the explanation you have for the court, or is there an explanation for, well, I guess you don't know why Heinz did it because you didn't, according to you, you didn't talk to him about it ahead of time.
Yes, sir.
And it seemed when Mr. Moore was asking you some questions earlier, you were talking about the DNA was in the evidence. There had been the jury had not heard any DNA evidence, correct?
Nope, they had not.
In your opening statements, you made a reference, as I recall, you will hear about physical evidence found on her body. I think you limited to that because you
Yes,
weren't
sir.
sure where this might go. And your DNA experts or individuals purporting, your DNA people had not testified yet.
True.
So you currently, while you agreed with Mr. Moore, yes, it was going great. Yes, it was all coming in. You hope it was coming in.
Yes, sir.
You don't, like you said, you don't know,
Exactly.
things go wrong.
Exactly. I can screw it up.
Well, but sometimes, Daryl, it's not even, sometimes the things that get screwed up, and I guess somebody could say Daryl screwed this up, but it's not even,
I absolutely,
it's, you never know what's coming, right?
yes, 100%.
So we can't sit here and tell Nathan, hey, we were gonna, I don't, but at least it's my belief, you can't tell Nathan with confidence, we were gonna win. You hope to
Check.
win. You
But
thought you were gonna win, but you don't know that.
Check.
Okay.
But my point is, there was no bombshell dropped because we were afraid. We didn't do, nothing happened because we were trying to draw a mistrial. That's, I think, where his question is going. That as being the lead, we were not seeking a mistrial at that point. I was as shocked about the Cellbright report actually being in existence. We'd seen the words in the report. And
One of the big problems when you have an incident like this, a mistrial like this, is the inability now, 6 years later, to go back and delve into this newly discovered evidence, correct?
yes, sir, obviously. But it happened by unintended oversight, change in again, I stand accountable to this court.
Correct, but with all due respect to Detective Heinz, it's
Yes.
unintended oversight on your part.
Yes, sir.
He, on the other hand, he testified under oath and top all these witnesses, all this evidence. He intentionally left out any evidence of alternative suspects, of interviews. Correct? When you asked him, what else did you do? That was it. That was it, he says. And the record reflects he never mentioned Jones or Pena, which is why you were so surprised when you learned, correct?
Yes.
That's all I have, Judge.
State.
The prosecution guide does list other possible suspects, correct?
Yes, sir, they do.
This
Specifically-
case, go ahead.
Well, specifically, Antonio Jones, and his, family in Upline. No reason to believe they weren't available from the time the case was charged to have been found.
It also lists Frank Hernandez and David Rocha, correct?
Yes,
Has this case ever been where everybody was certain that RC did it alone?
we always knew what our evidence was against the defendant. We knew other people were involved with him. We weren't sure of what their roles would be vis-a-vis the murder. And while they were charged for the credit card thefts, et cetera, the murder was really the driving force. We just had no objective evidence to connect them to it, but we were always on a diligent search for that.
Such as tracking down David Rocha.
Yes, that's why the warrant was issued. Hernandez, we questioned for what we could for the evidence that we had. He refused to give statements. I wound up sentencing him for his credit card theft. And then finally in calendar year 2021, he finally agreed to talk to the state. Had we had something to implicate him in the murder, I'm sure there would have been interviews gone earlier by my predecessors.
Okay. Pass the witness.
Defense? Defense, anything else?
No, that's all I have, Judge.
All right, thank you. You can step down. We are going to take our break. And if I could have everyone back here, I know everybody wants to have a little lunch because I didn't allow you to have lunch. So if we can have everybody back here by 4:30. How many more witnesses are anticipated?
Two.
We
On
have
our
two,
end.
Judge.
All right, and State, do you anticipate calling any witnesses?
I might call one.
One, okay. So 4:30, everyone.